All right, tonight I would like to call tonight's meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Searcy.
Here.
Councilmember Landman.
Here.
Councilmember Dubala.
Present.
Councilmember Schlegel.
Present.
Councilmember Gilbert.
Here.
Councilmember Honzak.
Present.
Councilmember Wesselek.
Here.
All right, good evening and Happy New Year to everyone. I hope that everyone had an opportunity to enjoy some time off and be with your family and loved ones. So we are excited that we are back in session. So for tonight's meeting, we have a couple of things. There's one adjustment to the agenda. We will not be discussing minutes tonight. That will be on a future agenda. We have 3 agenda items for this evening. The ICF Consultants presentation of the City Fleet Transition Report. We also have 2 work sessions. The first, planning for review of the state legislation and establishment of a bill review working group. And the second is an introduction to city boards and committees, council committee liaisons, and establishment of a working group to review applications. In terms of future agendas, on Wednesday, January the 15th, the council will meet at its regular time of 7:30 p.m. and we'll be discussing council priorities. On Monday, January the 20th, is the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. City offices are closed Sunday and Monday in observation of the holiday. Although I do hope that folks will join us for a celebration that will be happening in honor of MLK Day in the city at Piney Branch Elementary. More details, additional details will be discussed during council comments, but also want to just make sure that folks are aware that we will have an event happening on January the 20th. On Wednesday, January the 22nd, the City Council will meet at its regular time of 7:30, and during which we will have a legislative update, as well as work session. The first is revenue sources, discussion of revenue sources, commercial, railroad, and property, public utility taxes, and vacant property taxes or fees. And we are tentatively slated to discuss board and committee appointment recommendations. On Saturday, January the 25th, the City Council will have its retreat. The time and location will be determined and distributed at a later time. So with that, I am going to see if we have our youth council.
Our representative hasn't arrived, but I can speak on their behalf.
Excellent, no worries.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Christine Heidebrecht. I am the staff liaison to the Youth Council. And our representative seems to be caught someplace, so please pardon me as I jump in. First, I would like to introduce you to the students that are participating in our Youth Council this year and the wards they are from. Our chair is Leo Wanwusen, and he's from Ward 4. Our vice chair is Onid Ginsburg-Shukla from Ward 3. Our secretary is Obsa Ahmed from Ward 6. Our city council liaison is Kaleb Bond from Ward 6. Our social media coordinator is Mikkel Kidane from Ward 4. Our neighborhood school liaison is Sophia Sorensen, Ward 3. Community Impact Chair, Murilo dos Santos, Ward 3. Community Impact Co-Chair, Nuhayman Michael from Ward 2. And then members are Nate DeRoche from Ward 3, Amnon Essenu from Ward 2, and Emmeline Brown from Ward 2. We have been meeting since November, and we have 4 projects that we have narrowed in on for our work for this year. The first is a food drive that we are running through February 9th. And so we are asking for folks to bring non-perishable goods to the library, the recreation center, the community center, and El Golfo. We don't have our bins in place yet. The snow delay has caught us a little bit off guard, so we hope to get those in place before Friday. The second project that we have in place is we are wanting to have a litter bug competition. So we are looking to coordinate a cleanup within the city to challenge a youth council of another community to see which group can pick up more litter. Depending upon whom we find for that challenge, we are going to open it up to the public to join us to see if we can get in even more people in the community involved and see which community can do better at keeping their neighborhoods clean. The third item is a job fair. And this is one where we are really at the investigative stages of this. We would be interested in hosting a job fair for the youth in the community to be able to find summer positions or perhaps even longer. But first, we would like to have some feedback from local businesses to see if there is an interest from that side as well to participate in such an event. So as I mentioned, that is very early on. We are in that investigative stage, but if there are businesses interested, they can email us at tkpkyouthcouncil@tacomaparkmd.gov. And once we have a better idea, we will be back in touch with everybody to get that finished. And finally, a basketball tournament. We are beginning discussions to partner with the Recreation Department's Spring Bling event. It's either going to be the second or third week in May. And our portion of it would be a basketball 3-on-3 tournament, very similar to the old school versus new school that was proposed for last year. And actually, here is our representative, Caleb. We are just about finished, but if you would like to say anything about your time with the Youth Council.
Hello, my name is Caleb Bond. I'm the current city liaison for the Tacoma Park Youth Council. I've been on the council for about 3 years now. My experience on the Youth Council has been amazing, well, for the time I've been on here. This year is the same goal that I've had last year, and it's to get involved with the community as much as we can, and just have the council, just have more of a a presence within the community, so that we could be more widespread throughout the community and have more projects and stuff. So I mean, that's really my only goal, but yeah, thank you.
And to finish that up, if anybody is interested in finding out more about our projects, the email address once again is the TKPK Youth Council at tacomaparkmd.gov. We also have an Instagram account, and we would love to have more people following us, and that is at TKPK Youth Council. And if there is any questions from the council, we can take those now.
Wonderful. Well, first, thank you so much. I know with the weather outside, it's a little tricky getting in, but I am so excited for the wonderful work that you all are planning for the year. One question, how did you come up with the ideas for the activities that you were planning for the year? Did everyone just kind of brainstorm, or how did you come up with the list of the wonderful work that you're planning?
So for the most part, it was just, we had a session dedicated to our brainstorming, and after that we narrowed it down to the most important ideas and the most achievable ideas that we could accomplish this year. So I mean, it was really just a brainstorming session.
Wonderful. Well, I love the fact that not only your brainstorming resulted in some great activities, but they also align a lot with some of the things that the City Council is working to try to address as well. Food insecurity, bettering the environment, and trying to make sure that people have access to jobs and things to better their lives. So thank you all so much. You hit all of the right buttons when it comes to the important work that you're planning for the year. All right. And I'm not seeing any other lights. Again, thank you so much. And I would love the opportunity to come and just sit down and chat with the Youth Council this year. So I'll work with Christine to figure out a time to come by to just hear from you all about the great stuff that you're doing.
We would welcome it. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, so we're going to move to public comments this evening. Do we have any public comments? Come on down. Wonderful.
My name is Sandy Egan, and I live in Ward 1. I was before the council back in October, but we have a new city council, so I wanted to come and introduce the new council members to the village of Tacoma Park. The Village of Tacoma Park was created in 2014 by Wolfgang and Gertrude Mergner, two retired doctors who live in Tacoma Park. They saw that there was a need for seniors to receive services in Tacoma Park, and so they heard about the villages that were created in Boston, Massachusetts, 25 years ago, and they started a village here. The first and primary need for seniors was rides. And to date, the Village of Tacoma Park has given over 5,485 rides to Tacoma Park seniors to get them to the doctors, to church, to the grocery stores, and there is no cost for those rides to our senior members. We've also made it a point of keeping our dues very low. When we first started out, dues were $10 a year. Now they're up to 25 because we have insurance costs. The Village of Silver Spring, our nearest neighbor, charges $350 a year. So we try to keep everything low. We provide friendly visits to seniors who want to have somebody come into the home once a week for an hour to visit them. They're not going to do any work in your home, but they will socialize with you. We also have senior strollers where the seniors don't feel comfortable going out walking in the neighborhood by themselves, so they've been paired up with a volunteer who goes out once a week, depending on the weather, to get the people outside. We hold monthly aging well meetings, usually at Hefner Rec Center. This week we're having an in-person exercise class on Thursday at 1 o'clock, led by Michael Williams, who is an employee of the Tacoma Park Rec Department. We also do First Friday museum trips downtown. So we meet on the Tacoma Park Metro at 1 o'clock, and the first train that comes through, we get on and go down to the museum. And we usually get special tours in different museums downtown. But what I'm here to also tell you about, in front of you, you should have received brochures about the Village of Tacoma Park, which tells you all about our services and how people can join. And also there are door hangers there. Door hangers is a project by the Village of Tacoma Park, but I'd like to back up. We, the village, would like to thank the state of Maryland and the city of Tacoma Park for their total grant of $31,000 to the city to pay for the materials for repairs to seniors' homes. So all the members, you have to be a member, they have to reside in Tacoma Park, and they call and request a repair. And I have 14 very active volunteers. They go out, they evaluate what needs to be done, and gives the senior a yes or a no. We don't do anything involving ladders outside. So that's one of the restrictions. So far to date, we have helped over 30 seniors with repairs in their home and their exteriors. We have installed handrails both inside and out, grab bars in the bathroom, sidewalk repairs. We installed a wheelchair ramp, concrete repairs, a basement that had a leaky hole. So we started with that first and then did all the repairs inside the home. Because people don't know about the Village of Tacoma Park, we created the door hanger that you have, and we have been working very, very closely with code enforcement, with Rick Baravecchia, who targets different areas in Tacoma Park, and he goes out, and if he issues a courtesy citation, he leaves one of these with the courtesy citation so that seniors know that there is a resource that they can go to. He also just randomly goes out to different parts of Tacoma Park and he leaves these door hangers. So far we've gone through 500 of these and leaving them for the senior citizens. But we would like to thank the city of Tacoma Park and especially Patty Malin, who wrote the grant for this, Rick Baravecchia and code enforcement, and Ryan Kelly, who's been telling people about it by posting it on Facebook and Instagram. We need to get the word out, so what we're hoping is that you, the council members, if you know somebody in your neighborhood who could use our services that is age 55 or older, send them our way. The only thing is they have to join. And part of the grant includes a waiver of the fees, so the senior citizen doesn't have to pay that $25. I thank the council for the money and the good works that you are allowing us to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we thank you all for all of the wonderful work that you're doing in the community. Do we have any other public comments this evening? Any virtual public comments?
We do. We have several people signed up to speak online. Mary Jane Machui's first, if she's on. Sorry, and then if Mary Jane's not on, Susan Rogers, and we also have Paul Hubner.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Mary Jane.
Thank you. I'm in Ward 2, 404 Boyd Avenue. My son and I are disabled low-income residents. Believe it or not all the low-income residents are renters. Matter of fact, living on $31,750 a year, I'm not sure how much longer we're able to survive. But I'd like to say hello to the new council and a Happy New Year, and to the others who are here. I don't have a driver's license now, so that's why I'm taking advantage of the Zoom, and thank you. I started Parents of Special Needs Adults 10 years ago, and I've been begging for assistance since then. Unfortunately, very little has been done. Citizens are low income and have permanent disabilities that affect our brains are the most in need of all people, yet we get hardly anything. I see and hear you giving help to a lot of other people who are a lot better off. Not that they're not deserving, but what about us? We are the least able to help ourselves. And why do you continue over 10 years to ignore me? Why? Over 10 years I've been ignored, and I'm sorry for begging, okay? But it's depressing. And I want to thank Sandy and the Village of Tacoma Park, because they replaced my storm door and done other work. And also some very nice neighbors shoveled our front walk. And that was very nice. There are people in Tacoma Park good, but it's not enough. It's not enough. My son especially needs long-term help. He needs long-term assistance. He needs lifelong assistance. And so do a lot of other people here. We are low-income people with disabilities that affect our brains. We really, please, need help. We need it now. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Ms. Machui. Okay. Next up, I believe, is Susan Rogers.
Yes. Good evening, council members. As I said, my name is Susan Rogers, and I live at 416 Lincoln Avenue in Ward 2. So you have an item on your agenda tonight that is a work session that introduces council members to city boards and committees, city council committee liaisons, and establishment of a working group to review board and committee appointment applications. I would like the council to be aware that a number of city residents across various wards have raised concerns about apparent lack of action by the city in response to recommendations of the Sustainable Banking and Investment Task Force established by the city in 2021, and which delivered a 46-page report on March 22nd, 2022. The task force made a number of recommendations on how the city can implement a sustainable banking and investment policy founded on environmental, social, and governance criteria, known as ESG. Implementing an ESG policy would preclude the city from investing in financial institutions or companies that support manufacturers of weapons prohibited under the ESG ethical practices including nuclear weapons and other controversial weapons of mass destruction that indiscriminately harm civilian populations. However, we note that in the working document before you for discussion, under the agenda item, it says, quote, "No action was taken," unquote, on the task force recommendation to establish a new sustainable banking and investment committee in order to carry out the task force suggestion actions. We also note that while the task force recommended the retention and support of the Nuclear Free Tacoma Park Committee, which would have allowed continued citizen monitoring of city compliance with many of these principles, the council instead opted to abolish it. Therefore, I'm asking two things of you. We would appreciate the council's feedback on whether the council considered or acted upon any of the recommendations of the task force and whether specific staff were assigned to do this work. Secondly, we very much appreciate learning more about what the parameters of the proposed Sustainable Finance Committee are, a committee that is referred to in the task force report as a Sustainable Banking and Investment Committee. Please let us know how the goals and objectives of the proposed committee correspond to the recommendations of the task force. Thank you for considering my comments on behalf of residents in Tacoma Park who seek to prohibit city investments in financial institutions or companies that are not in line with the ESG ethical practices. We look forward to getting your response, which you can send to me, Susan Rogers. My email address is gjpgroup@yahoo.com. Again, gjpgroup@yahoo.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, and I think the next person, Paul Huebner.
Good evening, Paul Huebner, Ward 3. First of all, thanks for making this available on Zoom. I didn't have to truck in the snow. But I'm here to strongly concur with an earlier commenter tonight and add my name to thank this council for your very tangible support to our village of Tacoma Park. Earlier tonight, you heard from Sandy Egan, our volunteer coordinator, and the force and will of our small but growing group of small repairs volunteers. For the record, you should know that since Wolfgang and I did our first small repair in an apartment in the Franklin some 10 or more years ago, Sandy has accepted the immense responsibility to serve our neighbors on a daily basis. Just this morning, she delegated another crew to a long-term residence home. Over the years, Sandy has dispatched herself driven over 5,000 village rides, 5,000 rides to our seniors. She's responsible for accepting, reviewing, organizing, and assigning our small repairs committee members throughout the city. She does all the paperwork, the grant proposals, tracks the hours worked and expenses incurred, and she tracks completion. She allows us volunteers to simply show up and do the work easy peasy. We touch lives daily, and Sandy enables us to turn the spirit of service into the flesh of deeds. I offer my sincere thanks for the opportunity to serve, my gratitude to you who also serve, and remind all that in every great religious tradition, the second commandment is to love thy neighbor as thyself. God bless Sandy Egan, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huebner. Do we have any other public comments this evening? Okay, seeing no more public comments, we're going to go to council comments. Do we have any council comments this evening? Councilmember Gilbert.
Thank you, Mayor. I was really moved by what I'm learning about the village of Tacoma and what you've been doing. And I used to work close with Mr. Mergner, Wolfgang, as a police officer, and I would love to be back in touch with him if you could reach out. And no? Ouch. Okay. That's really sobering news, and I'm so sorry. He was a great man, and he made the 27 years that I spent with the police department very enjoyable. He was loved by so many, And it was so great to have been able to work with him through those years. And thank you for what you've been doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilbert. Okay, seeing Councilmember Landman, I'm like, come on, let's get this.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My reflexes aren't back to par after the new year. I just wanted to, first of all, I agree with all the wonderful things that have been said about the Village of Tacoma Park and its leader, its fearless leader, and I will add to that one more very favorable comment about another Village of Tacoma Park initiative, which is the Fix-It Clinic. And the Fix-It Clinic is an opportunity for neighbors to help neighbors, and you can bring your small appliances or your sewing repairs that are needed to the clinic and have things fixed for free. The next one will be on February 2nd, Sunday, from 12:30 to 2:30 at the temporary library site. I hope to see you there. If you want to register to have something fixed, you got to let people know ahead of time what you've got, and go to the Friends of the Tacoma Park, Maryland Library site to register. My second word of caution is that to let people know that the post office will be closed tomorrow because of the, in honor of the passing of President Jimmy Carter, and many other federal offices will also be closed. So don't trek down there in the ice and snow hoping to mail a letter. And finally, speaking of trekking in the ice and snow, this is a plea to my neighbors, those of you who have not yet shoveled your walks completely. This is a problem. I was out walking today and saw many places where hazards still exist, and I realize we have a compliance system for that in the city, but we really don't want to have to turn in that direction. We want to ask our neighbors to please shovel your walk, or ask one of the many friendly Boy Scouts out there to help you do it, to make sure it gets done and protect many of us who are not as good on our feet as we used to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Honzak.
I just want to say a huge thank you to the village. I've seen and heard directly from people who have received your services, and just with so much gratitude for the great work that you do. And Paul Huebner, if you're still watching, thank you for all the fixing that you've been doing. I've just appreciated the partnership. I just recently did a hot chocolate event at Essex House, and people were really excited to learn about it. I know you had given me a packet of the flyers, and I was able to distribute them, and people were interested to hear about it. So I think we just need to work together. I was delighted to hear that you have a partnership with the code enforcement to do that, because I think that's an excellent partnership and a great plan. I feel like there was something else somebody else said. Oh, I know. Councilmember Landman, I'm having trouble finding your last name there. I recall, and maybe someone here could remind me, there was a service in the past, I think, of volunteers called the Snow Angels. Am I right? And I think they're still on the old website, at least. It's something there. Probably nobody's looking for it, but I don't really remember that. I have been here for 20-something years, but I haven't been the age and stage of life that I'm in now. And I was trying to get my own teenagers to go out and volunteer their services, because we're not so close to the Presbyterian Church with the Boy Scouts. And, I won't tell you how my kids responded, but let me just say it was challenging. But it just there are a number of people that were clearly struggling, and thus again I say thank you to the village for the things that you are doing for a lot of those folks. I wonder if there's a way that we can, as a community, I don't necessarily mean council or staff even, but just think about how we might be more prepared as a community for that sort of thing, because there are clearly a number of people. I had my next door neighbors were recovering from COVID across the street. I think the same may have been true. I'm not sure, but I just see it all around me, and a lot of folks who have young babies who just can't quite get out the door. So, if there's any ideas anybody has.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Honzak. Councilmember DeBala.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everybody. Good to be back. Thank you, Sandy, and thank you to the village. I hear nothing but good. Some of those 30 people are in Ward 2, and I hear nothing but good things. And I had the flyers already, and I loved giving them out, so thank you for that too. I want to thank Public Works for the clean roads in Tacoma Park. I had a chance to go somewhere this morning, and as soon as I hit the DC line, I did kind of regret that I decided to go anywhere. So thank you for that. That's a lot of work in a short time. I wanted to appreciate the Youth Council for showing up and talking about what you're doing. Your projects are really exciting. I'm really psyched about it. And one last thank you again to Public Works for the paving of Aspen Boyd Lincoln. Apparently went quite smoothly. And for those who asked me today and yesterday about the stop sign lines, it needs to be dry. It needs to be a little warmer. So they'll get in. They're just not going in today or tomorrow. Please be patient on that one. And I'm going to assume that the deputy city manager is going to be talking about Martin Luther King Day. Okay. Are you going to do it? Okay. All right, great. That's it for me. Thank you.
Oh, no worries. Councilmember Honzak, I'll let you do
Sorry,
a quick.
I'm going to slide in. I forgot, I didn't see you behind the, I couldn't see the youth council was still over here. So, hi. I just wanted to say thank you. We really appreciate you. And I'm really excited, I hope, to engage with this year's youth council. When I started a couple years ago on the council, one of the highlights of my first year was when the youth council invited us up here and asked us some really tough questions. And so I don't know if that's anything that you were thinking of, but we're happy to do that off dais. You guys always have the best questions and you get us thinking. So anyway, thank you for the work that you do. And I think any of us would be delighted to join you if you'd like to invite us. Thanks.
Wonderful. And Councilmember Schlegel.
Thank you, Mayor Susie. I also wanted to acknowledge the Youth Council and Colin. Thank you to you and everybody else on the council for the range of things that you're coming up with. And I'm really inspired by your idea of just trying to be as present as possible in the community. And I was just thinking, with the snow angels no longer existing, and you're talking about a job fair, it might be possible to think about, having a sign up for people available for ongoing, part-time jobs of various kinds. I wanted to acknowledge, so thank you very much for what you're doing. Very excited. Everything from 3-on-3 to job fair. I wanted to acknowledge that I heard what Mary Jane Matune said, if she's still on, and I really appreciate that she has gotten help from the Village of Tacoma Park, and I will look into further. I think it'll be good if we can look into further the needs that she says have been unaddressed. I wanted to pass on thanks from a Woodland resident who had a sewer line break and was incredibly thankful to the city manager and to Ian in terms of the city engineer, in terms of a quick and clear response about what WSSC was doing there. I wanted to acknowledge that assessments are out and people are thinking about how their tax assessment has changed, and many people have written to me asking what does this mean for them, and so I'm just sensitive to that, and I wanted people to know that that's certainly something where not all assessments have gone up, some have gone down, so there may be ramifications in terms of the projections that we've been making about revenue. Also, thanks from Elm Avenue residents. There was a house fire, and a number of city staff have been very responsive in regard to that family. I wanted to just acknowledge President Carter's passing and that he's lying in state at the Capitol tonight. He was always one of several Americans who has inspired me in my life. He diversified the cabinet and federal leadership positions more than all previous presidents combined. He recognized climate change and the need to conserve energy and use renewables ahead of many other people. He was a citizen of the world, and he did so much to help eradicate tropical infectious diseases. And he worked on a level with everybody, which makes me think of the spirit of the Village of Tacoma Park and that kind of humility and sense of service that Paul Huebner talked about. Last thing, I wanted to thank the council member next to me who noticed that I bike to city council meetings usually, not tonight, too icy. And she got me this high visibility windbreaker that was in her house. So to those of you who bike in the winter and the dark months, be visible. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Councilmember DeBala.
I just wanted to follow up on something that Councilmember Schlegel said and ask this deputy city manager, sorry, once again, if you all have decided whether and how you're going to be able to do the map of complete assessments across the city that was done 3 years ago and 6 years ago, because that would speak to Councilmember Schlegel's residents' concerns about what's gone up, what's got down, what the impact is.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Councilmember DeBala. We will be mapping assessments again this year. In terms of timing, I think we can expect it within the next 2 weeks or so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and just to kind of piggyback off of that, we are trying to conduct outreach with SSTAT to see about a possibility of having them come and present I know in my own neighborhood, there's just a lot of anomalies where it's not logical in terms of how much some properties went up that sat right next door to one that went down, and neither property changed. So it is going to be important for us to make sure at least that we have a firm understanding. And I do just want to stress, I actually read a news article that it's not just us complaining about it. All of the assessments that have happened has been pretty all over the place. And so I actually heard about Baltimore, and there's some other places that are experiencing some of these difficulties as well. So fingers crossed we'll be able to engage with our external stakeholders to at least gain a little bit of clarity around the process that was taken for developing the assessments. But I think one thing that is really important that our staff has already done is just remind folks about the deadlines that you have to attest your assessments. So 45 days from the date of the notice. So definitely want to encourage people who are questioning the accuracy of their assessments to please contest. Other things. So although we were on holiday break, we still had to do work. So last month during the break, I testified on what I've dubbed the liquor store bill, MC 2125. Delegate Charkoudian has put forward a bill to, as was discussed, encourage liquor boards to assess the number of and data surrounding the liquor stores before assigning new licenses. So testified on that. I want to echo Councilmember DeBala in highlighting Public Works for the wonderful work that was done in clearing the snow. Also, our city manager's office, particularly Ryan, was really working really hard to keep everyone notified of city building closures and what everyone should expect. So all of those notifications, and I know deputy city managers and others have been working late to try to figure out what the next day is going to look like. And so I appreciate everyone for all of your hard work on that. Susan Rogers, thank you so much for your comments this evening, and we can definitely follow up with you offline in terms of the status of the recommendations from the task force on sustainable banking. And also, I want to thank Mary Jane Machui for your continued advocacy for individuals with disabilities. Just so that you know, the council in its recent presentation to the District 20 delegation also highlighted the need for resources for individuals with disabilities. So we will be looking out for and encouraging and advocating for additional resources for that community. But thank you for your continued work. I also want to, one thing I did miss was saying thank you to our city staff and Councilmember Wesselek for participating in the Purple Line meeting as it relates to the closure of Carroll at University. There's still a lot of work and a lot of back and forth that we've been doing, but that is also something that has had a lot of meetings and a lot of engagement during the holiday break. So I would be remiss if I did not send my appreciation to folks that were on those calls and walking and trying to make sure that we can kind of manage that smoothly. In terms of upcoming things on I will be, there's a COG board, executive board meeting on Friday, so I will be participating in that. Also on Monday, there's an elected officials Purple Line construction briefing, and that is related to New Hampshire Ave and Riggs Road. Just trying to check. And also, super excited. We'll be at the recognition for Marty Fry. Our arborist is going to graduate school, so he will be leaving the city, but we do want to take this opportunity to appreciate him for all of his work that he's done in the city, as well as show him how much we will miss him in terms of the work that he's been doing in the city, and wish him the best of luck in what he has next. Okay, and I'm trying to just make sure that I have the full list of the MLK events. Because
10 to 12 at Tacoma Woods.
Because there are a lot. I'm just,
Yeah.
let me just, MLK events.
Yeah.
Okay, a landing page. And if everybody could just bear with me, because there are a lot of things that are happening in honor of MLK, and I don't want to forget. Okay, so there's a lot of things that are happening in honor of MLK. Let's see. On Sunday, I believe January the 12th, from 1 to 3 p.m., the Weed Warriors will be organizing a park cleanup at Long Branch Park, starting at Garland Neighborhood Park, en route to one of our Tacoma Park local public elementary schools, Roland Terrace Elementary School. The Weed Warriors will also be organizing on the 17th from 9 until 11 a.m. And that cleanup will be starting near Arliss, adjacent to the north end of Tacoma Park, the Long Branch Library, and the upcoming Long Branch Purple Line Station. On Friday, January the 17th, from 9:30 a.m. until 11 a.m., Small Things Matter will be organizing the Kahlua Foods distribution at the Tacoma Park SDA Church. On Monday, January the 20th, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., the MLK committee will be organizing a park cleanup at Tacoma Woods. They're meeting at the Darwin Avenue parking lot. Trash bags will be provided. On that day, January the 20th at 1 p.m., the Friends of Sligo Creek will be organizing a litter cleanup starting at Dale Drive tennis courts on Sligo Creek en route to one of our local Tacoma Park public middle schools, Silver Spring International Middle School. And then there is also on Sunday, January the 26th, from 9:30 until 1 p.m., Small Things Matter is hosting the Kindness Day in honor of Tommy Raskin, the Piney Branch Elementary School. Teens are needed, and they are offering SSL hours. And then the main event in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, the MLK committee will be hosting a celebration potluck, and that is on Monday, January the 20th, from 5 until 7 p.m. at the Tacoma Park Middle School, and that is 7611 Piney Branch Road. I will be emceeing the event, so definitely looking forward to it. And my colleague, Councilmember Gilbert, will be our keynote speaker. So we are super excited for all of the wonderful events that will be happening in honor of Martin Luther King Day. I want to encourage folks to check out our website. There's a landing page with all of this material and all of the list of all of the events. And I think I've covered everything. With that, I know it's a lot, right? With that, I will turn things over to our Deputy City Manager for city manager comments.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening all. From Housing and Community Development, thank you to everyone who submitted proposals for the city's sidewalk and traffic calming funding for the next fiscal year. We will be holding a public meeting on January 23rd, 2025 at 6:30 p.m. in the Community Center Auditorium to hear your comments on the proposed projects. Spanish and Amharic translation will be available. We look forward to hearing from you. For residents who are renting, this is a reminder that your landlord is required to ensure that your apartment has proper heating. If your heating goes out, your landlord is required to provide a temporary solution, space heaters, etc., while they fix the issue. Please call 311 and report your heat is out ASAP. Baroque Chamber Orchestra Relic explores the beginning of time in 5 evocative chapters in a free concert at the Tacoma Park Community Center on Friday, January 24th at 7:30 p.m. The chapters include the emergence of the elements, separation of earth and the heavens, formation of storms and seas, creation of birds and beasts, and finally, the birth of humankind. Inspired by ancient creation stories from across the world, this dramatic program features music by multiple composers. No tickets or reservations are required for this free Tacoma Park Arts event, and seating is first come, first serve. From the library, join Sylvie Chafer and Dave Burbank for this intergenerational program. Vote for your favorite contender for the best illustrated book published in the United States in the past year. Our last year in this year's series will be on Sunday, January 12th in the library at 3 p.m. Join us. We'll have refreshments and lively discussion. A Cat's Life Rescue is coming with adoptable kittens to the library on January 26th, Sunday, from 12 to 3 p.m. Join us for a post-holiday pick-me-up. From the police department, Tacoma Park Police are collecting new and gently used bath towels, beach towels, bathroom rugs, hand towels, washcloths, blankets, beds, toys, and unopened food to help Montgomery County animal shelters. We will be collecting through Friday, February 7th. Please bring your donations to the Tacoma Park Police Department lobby at 7500 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, MD, and we will get them to the animal shelters. Note, for the safety of the animals, no fitted sheets, items with zippers, snaps, and/or fabrics with ripped or frayed edges. Thank you for your generosity. The 2025 Community Police Academy will begin on March 4th, 2025. The Community Police Academy is a 12-week program consisting of one class a week on Tuesday evenings from 7 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. The classes cover patrol, traffic enforcement, use of force, criminal investigation, firearms, community policing, and more. The presentations are slideshow or lecture style and will be presented by officers, detectives, and civilians of the Tacoma Park Police Department. There will also be multiple opportunities for hands-on learning through equipment demonstrations, practical scenarios, field trips, and ride-alongs with patrol officers. The Community Policing Academy is free to the public. Seats are limited to the first 25 students and will be filled on a first-come, first-served basis. The Tacoma Park Police Department encourages all applicants to be able to commit to the full 12 weeks to get the most out of the program. If you are interested in learning about the Tacoma Park Police Department and local government, you are 16 years or older and live or work in Tacoma Park, you may apply. The applicants will be assessing sensitive areas of the police department during the class. The applicants will be required to fill out a background check waiver to attend the class. The applicants may not have any serious misdemeanor or felony offenses. Applications for the Community Police Academy are available at the Tacoma Park Police Department. Please complete both application and background waiver form. These forms can also be found on the webpage. Links will be included in tomorrow's posted city manager comments. And finally, the deadline to submit a completed application and background waiver form is Friday, February 14th, 2025. From the city manager's office, our staff shout out this week is from the Public Works Department. We are pleased to share the exciting news that Doria Estrada, our sustainability manager, gave birth to a baby boy, Nicholas Nico Riahi, on January 1st. A little New Year's surprise while visiting her family in Maine. Both Baby and Dory are doing well. And finally, city offices will be open on time tomorrow with flexible teleworking. This concludes the city manager's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to Dory and her family. So with that,
Madam Mayor, may I ask a quick point of information for the Deputy City Manager? You mentioned that the January 20, I want to make sure I get the date right, but the meeting, I think it's the 23rd, to hear about comments on proposals for street traffic calming and sidewalks. My question is, if somebody has proposed such a change, should they attend that meeting to advocate for theirs? That's my first half. And the second half, is there a summary somewhere of the pending proposals so people know what's on the agenda to make sure if there's something relevant to them that they should check the agenda for? Is there like a list of projects?
Yes, there will be a list published in advance of the meeting. It'll include all of the received proposals from council, those proposed by staff, and then those proposed by the public. I don't have a specific date when that'll be available, but when I get one, I will be sure to share it with council, and we will be sure to notify the public. And in terms of advocating for those that have been shared with city staff, the goal of the meeting is really to get clarity on the issue that has been described to staff. So I would say less that members of the public would like to add that has not come across in written form, please attend and share that additional detail.
And
thank you,
just for
Councilmember Schlegel.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, should we be reaching out to people, or is there an invitation going out to say the point of contact if it was a resident-initiated request?
I believe so. Director Braithwaite, do you know for sure? Yeah, so the individuals who submitted their proposals will receive a specific invite.
Okay, Councilmember DeBala.
One last question about this. And so when the council adopted the new process, we talked about a community meeting to hear concerns. So this is more of an informational meeting and not a community meeting to hear concerns from people who don't like an idea? Are there going to be individual meetings later?
Yes, so this is intended to kind of survey the entire list and get additional feedback from the community on what the specific challenge is. The other goal is to, in theory, there are areas in neighborhoods where there are concerns that are related.
Oh, yeah.
And so we hope that in having these meetings, some of that relationship between some of the things that have been discussed in written form will present themselves. And I think we can only get a sense of that from the individual or from kind of this group discussion. There will be, as these projects are better defined and prioritized, there will be additional discussion about those that first are presented to council for approval, but then as they go through the process, there'll be additional detail that we'll share with the community about the design of the program, or excuse me, the design of the project for those that have been funded by council.
Okay, and so would that include a meeting on a particular proposal? Or
On a particular project, yes.
yes, once
They
moved
are
forward.
presented to council,
Yeah.
approved for funding, and we have a project design, then there will be additional meetings with the community.
Okay, so after they're picked by council.
Yes.
Okay, the reason I ask is because there are a couple things on the list for Ward 2 where I know there's a couple of folks who don't like the idea. And so at what point is this is not the place for them to come and voice their concerns. So when is that? During the budget process when we're considering funding it?
I think the best way to answer that question is when there's a project to talk about.
Right.
If there are concerns about the design of the project, then those residents can bring those concerns to city staff.
May I double check on this? Because it would seem like if you're trying to prioritize projects at this meeting, which is, I think, one of the objectives is to hear from the community to help you make those decisions. If there is actually a countervailing view in the community about whether a project should be prioritized and funded by the council, it seems like maybe they would want to be at this meeting as well, the people who have a different viewpoint. I think that's what you're driving at, isn't it?
Yeah.
Any and
Councilmember
all are
Thomas? So-
welcome to attend the meeting.
Any and all are welcome.
And
Okay.
the intent of the meeting is to get feedback generally.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yeah, but I would really caution folks from having residents get riled up about something that ultimately the council decides not to fund, right? So this is, I think, a way for staff to really hone in on the list of items that they want to put before council for funding. Once those projects have been identified and receive the funding, then those are the opportunities for residents who have concerns about a particular project. Because I will say, even with our prior process, we always had residents that had, concerns about a sidewalk or about a speed bump like that. You're not going to avoid that, right? But it is better for us to make sure that we're at least getting accurate information around the need, whether or not it aligns with other issues, so that staff can properly cost out what a potential improvement may entail, so that when it comes to council, we have an idea of what we would need to fund, or at least allocate in the budget. Now, that's not to say that, we could get down a path and ultimately decide to not do something. That's a real possibility. But at least at this point in time, I think the goal is to make sure that we have that prioritized list of projects that we can estimate the costs for, so that they could be properly incorporated into the budget for the council to decide on whether or not we want to fund.
And so once we have the prioritized list and the costs during the budget process, if there is a resident who doesn't like the idea of a project at all, that would be the point at which they would.
Quite frankly, I'm having a hard time understanding what you mean.
Okay, for example.
The point of the process is to be as objective as possible, and
Right.
so we've created a standard. There's a rubric. There are objective measures that this council has reviewed and approved, and so it will go through that process. And of course, if there's a dissenting opinion, we are all ears.
Okay.
But that is not anybody's opinion, pro or con, is not the decision-making factor. The objective process is how we're going to make the decision. The goal of getting community feedback is on the specific design. And the goal of this initial meeting is to hear more about what the issue is, what the challenges are that people are facing. And then we'll go through the process that you all have approved, and then we'll have the community meetings where we're talking about specific design. And so again, if there's specific concern about the design, then that'll be addressed in those meetings. But you all will have an opportunity to review the prioritized list based on the review of staff, based on the criteria that we've all gone through. And so that's kind of how the process has been established. Yeah.
And I also think that it's important for members of council to know, if there's a project that ultimately comes before us for funding that you have residents that are up in arms about, then it is, hey, I want to encourage us not to fund this. Right? And you are well within your ability as a council member to deal with your residents in removing something from a list for funding. So I think that, again, there's going to be different places in the process where residents have an ability to provide their insights on love or hate aspects of a design or a project at large, and then we have the ability to make decisions regarding whether or not we want to fund something.
Thank you for clarifying that. I know that wasn't on the agenda, but I think it's important.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 1, ICF consultant presentation of city fleet transition report.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, hi.
Thank you.
Brandon, I'm going to do a little brief introduction and then turn it over to you. I really appreciate you joining us this evening.
That's right.
Yeah, council, I Happy to be here to bring this in front of you. In May of last year, the city staff engaged ICF through the Pepco EV Smart Fleet Assessment Program to provide this fleet assessment. It evaluates the various costs as well as emission reductions and provides guidance for us as we transition to EVs. I will note that the City Council has made a commitment to be net zero. Our resolutions from 2019 and 20. So we have a commitment to be net zero by 2035. Obviously, fleet transition is a big part of that. Greenhouse gas emissions represent a little under half of the emissions that affect our city. Now, of course, only a very small percentage of those are related to city fleet, but they do play a role. And the City Council has also, on numerous occasions, expressed its commitment to replace vehicles with EVs or technologies when and as they are become available, and when the equipment meets the functional needs for that equipment. So this report compiles a significant information, and we really appreciate ICF's diligence on the various factors. It is a very weighty topic with lots of impacts and lots of things to measure and evaluate against. So this assessment will help us, the city, take the next steps in our transition plan. And I did want to point out that of the city's just over 70 vehicles, we do have 8 that are currently EVs. They're mostly sedans and our one sweeper, so that's just a little under 12% of our fleet. So we have been taking steps in this regard, but the intention of working with ICF and Pepco through this report was to really get a very broad handle on charging needs, fleet transition capabilities, priority setting, and I will also stress that it is city policy to replace vehicles as they become retired. So this process, and what you'll hear about tonight, continues that approach, where as a vehicle is met its useful life and is ready to be deadlined, that's when we evaluate alternative fuel options. I think that is about all I wanted to say to begin, and I'll sit down, and I want to turn it over to Brandon Schneider, who's the account manager with ICF, and I think he's going to be joined by others on the ICF team, and if so, then you, Brandon, or they can introduce themselves. But with that, I'll turn it over to you all.
I think we've lost you. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Awesome.
Great. Thank you. No, good evening again and Happy New Year. Thank you for having us and for giving us this opportunity to share the results from our assessment. And, you know, my thanks again to the city staff that we've worked with closely throughout this process, and to the council for being forward thinking and embarking on, you know, this as you just heard, multifaceted and deep process of electrifying the EV fleet. So ICF is partnered with Pepco to offer this fleet assessment report to their commercial customers. So I do just want to call that out. This is slightly different than any of the other sort of more detailed or bespoke offerings that we may do for municipalities or work closely in hand with. But you know, the goal here is really to provide these Pepco commercial customers with key information about the steps and the market conditions and what options are available to them as they embark on this electrification journey. So we really see this as a beginning steps strategy document to help present you with the guiding principles of taking those first steps into electrification and giving you a sense of what the financial impact of those decisions can be. So that's really the framework that we try and use as we step through this report. I just wanted to have that in the back of your head. And I will go ahead and share my screen. I think you all should have been provided with a copy of the report and the presentation that I am going to step through as well. And I will endeavor to keep my remarks brief to allow time for your questions. But if at any point there is something that does raise a flag, you know, please feel free to interrupt. Want to make sure that I'm providing, you know, you with the relevant information and that our time together is as useful as possible. So I can go ahead and share my screen. And let me know if you all can see that.
We can see it.
Perfect. So again, just a broad strokes, what we'll do very briefly is just give you an overview of the assessment process and the steps along the way, the factors we continue and what goes into producing that final report document. And then in more detail, we will talk about the two scenarios that we modeled. So the first is a primarily cost-effective based strategy. So in this, and we'll go into greater detail, is based on a total cost of ownership model. So in this scenario, we would only recommend a vehicle for conversion to an EV where its total cost of ownership is equal to an internal combustion engine or a gas vehicle or less than. So that's the primary scenario that we use as our baseline. But we also modeled for the city a 100% electrification scenario. And usually we like to model these two specific scenarios to give you a sense of what the delta between these two can be. Between the cost-effective and the 100% electrification scenario, oftentimes there is a middle path that can be charted, and so we like to sort of map these two ends of the spectrum, and we find that it provides you with the most insight. In addition to the final report that you received, city staff also received an Excel supplement that comes with this report, which breaks down on a vehicle-by-vehicle basis the recommendations that we made, and it also will show if a vehicle wasn't recommended under that cost-effective scenario, how far out of alignment it was from being recommended. So in some cases, that vehicle could have been just $50 away from that break-even number, or it could have been thousands of dollars depending on the specific scenario. But we have provided that to city staff. So our goal here really is to equip you with a set of tools and scenarios to help guide the path that you take as you look at these electric options. And we'll jump to the next slide. So as we embark on this process, there's a few key inputs that we worked very closely with city staff to get an understanding of the existing baseline fleet. So that means collecting all the vehicles in the fleet, typing them, making sure we have an understanding of the mileage that they're doing, what their typical use case is. And we've been in conversation with city staff to understand not just sort of the numbers of it all and the mileage and that, but the qualitative aspects. So how these vehicles are being used day to day, what the demands on them are, things that we might not necessarily see just purely from the numbers, but to get at a real sense of what a transition would look like. We don't want to recommend an EV conversion that doesn't actually serve the purpose of the vehicle. So, if there's a need for a pickup truck, we don't want to replace that with a smaller sedan type vehicle. We want to make sure that we're making recommendations that are like for like and meeting that vehicle's role. So once we've, gathered all of this data and sought this input, what we'll do is we'll then throw this into our model, which again is based on that total cost of ownership. So that includes an all-encompassing sort of vehicle capital costs, so the cost of acquiring the vehicles, the annual fuel costs, annual maintenance costs, as well as the associated costs that would go with any necessary charging infrastructure, hardware, or upgrades that would need to go into that process, and the installation costs as well. And as we're doing this and looking at the total cost of ownership, we're also looking at any potential grants, subsidies, tax credits that may be applicable to help offset those costs, so that when we are calculating that total cost of ownership, we're really being comprehensive and looking at not just the acquisition costs, but the actual cost to run those vehicles over their lifetime. And, as I said, any tax credits or offsets that may help reduce that initial purchasing price. And as we are looking and making these recommendations, we maintain an EV model library that has over 600 makes and models. And this ranges from light duty vehicles and sedans all the way through heavy duty and specialized vehicles like trash trucks, sweepers, things of that nature. So we try and maintain one of the most comprehensive libraries out there, and we're constantly updating it quarterly. And all of this comes together into the final report, which you received a copy of. So this breaks down, based on that total cost of ownership analysis, the final recommendations, which we'll step through in a moment, and also endeavors to provide you with some general sort of background information about the EV industry, different charging level types, And of course, that final delivery also includes that Excel supplement and any ongoing support as we've continued to be in conversation with the city to help make this transition, as expedient and as painless as possible. Okay. I will jump to the next slide. Again, this is just we won't dwell here too long. As you heard, we examined 72 total vehicles in the fleet, which are mostly gasoline based. There are a handful of diesel vehicles, and as you heard, 8 are already battery electric vehicles. So in our analysis, we looked at 69 total on-road vehicles. We also did look at some non-road equipment, which is why that total is 72. But just focusing in for a second on the on-road vehicles, we looked at 69 total vehicles. And of course, just want to call out as well that more than half of those vehicles were police vehicles that were as part of the fleet. And then there were a handful of medium and heavy duty vehicles as well. But this broadly was just the input in the fleet that we started with. I'll jump to the next one. And again, just to give you a little bit more detail on that total cost of ownership, and just to underline that point, and where this may differ for some other sort of reports that you've seen, we are really focused on, in this base scenario, only making that recommendation where we can match the capability and either match or beat the cost of an internal combustion engine replacement. And again, we do tailor our recommendations as well to the vehicle retirement schedule. So we worked with the city to understand how their procurement process works, on what timeline or what threshold they're using to determine when vehicles are at the end of their life. And then working backwards from there to understand the vehicles ranges that are going to be needed, based on the mileage that they're driven and the daily mileage that they're required for their operations, and their usage patterns. So we can understand how best to recommend charging, what level of charging needs to be recommended. If there's a long time between shifts, we often can get away with lower powered chargers, which typically are significantly less expensive. But there may be high utilization vehicles in the police scenario where, faster charging and lower downtime are necessities, where, we're factoring in the costs of higher speed charging and the availability of that and the associated infrastructure and charger costs that are going to be higher. So we're factoring all of that in at this stage. And of course, looking at the different vehicle types and classes as we're making these recommendations and making sure that we're matching those capabilities. Okay, and then just to broadly step through, so of the 72 total vehicles, again, there were 69 that were active on-road vehicles. Of those 69 vehicles, there were 57 that had a like-for-like replacement as an EV, meaning that there was a vehicle on the market that was capable of meeting that need or could serve as a suitable replacement. And then this final step that cuts that final thing is the recommended for conversion is that total cost of ownership basis. So based on the use case, as we've modeled them out, only 23 vehicles in the current city fleet are at that cost parity for recommendations. So meaning, again, that they are cheaper than or equal to an internal combustion engine replacement. There we go. And again, just to give you some highlights from that, those recommendations from this base total cost of ownership scenario, based on that, we expect the city to save $288,000 approximately over the 29 years. And I can talk through those timelines between and how we average those out. But of course, that also, on top of that, you would expect to see $228,000 of fuel savings and nearly $300,000 of maintenance savings over the lifetime of those vehicles and their replacements. And that is equivalent to, 329 metric tons of CO2 eliminated over those 29 years, which I know is a little bit of abstract of a figure, but that's about the equivalent of 268 homes or switching 88,509 incandescent light bulbs to LEDs. So we do try and make these numbers as approachable as possible over the time of it. And the TCO savings, why you're seeing that over the 29-year period, it's because we're modeling out from the last replacement in the fleet. So later, as you'll see in the replacement timelines, we're calculating those savings over the lifetime of the vehicle. So that has to include the last replacement that would be on part of this schedule. So as you can see, sort of broadly here, this chart steps through the existing ICE fleet, the internal combustion engine replacements, existing EV fleet, and the EV replacements, and gives you a sense of over this transition, if you were to adopt the recommendations from just the base total cost of ownership, most effective scenario, this is what the composition of the fleet would look like over time. And I will also add, not only just to give you a sense of what that would look like, the maximum vehicle life that we worked with under the assumptions here was 15 years. So those total cost of ownership figures would project out to 2052, just so you have that number in the fact figure on hand. We'll jump to, and this is detailed in greater length in the actual final report. So I don't want to spend too much time here because I think probably better to get to your questions and to review also the 100% electrification scenario. But this is just a rough breakdown of the specific models that came in as the most cost-effective replacement for each of these sort of vehicle class types. So just to call out a couple, the Ford Mustang Mach-E and the Tesla Model Y for police SUVs. And in the refuse truck category, Lion Electric, the Lion 6 Refuse was also a notable financial savings that was available. So I just want to highlight those two before sort of jumping and spending some time on the next stage. I will also call out too, as part of this TCO sort of limited smaller fleet conversion recommendation, we are recommending the installation of 23 total chargers, and I did want to call out just those two DC fast chargers that would primarily be servicing the police fleet to maintain that high uptime and the high utilization just based on the demands there. But I do want to call out just the cost disparity that you see between those. There is a significant jump when you jump to those DC fast chargers with the associated infrastructure and hardware costs that come with them. So where possible, we do like to try and optimize for lower speed chargers and those level 2 chargers, just because you do tend to get better bang for your buck there. Okay. And then again, this graph just sort of steps out what the total cost of ownership looks like. And this factors in, again, those higher costs where you're seeing those higher bars. Those are years that have a higher recommendation for EV replacement within them. And again, this is sort of, it comes with accompanying text that's in the report that steps through it. But I do want to make sure that we also have some time to spend with questions. Apologies, that's my train of thought there. But yeah, this also just illustrates the cost of ownership totals on an annual basis between a full replacement of every vehicle in the fleet with an internal combustion engine vehicle and that EV cost. So in years where there are higher acquisition due to a higher number of EVs being converted, you'll see that primarily in 2028 and 2032, those higher acquisition costs are coming in. But then the years preceding or that follow that don't have any specific recommendations or conversions because the conversion has been completed, you'll note that the total cost of ownership figures for those years are lower, and that's largely due to fuels costs, maintenance costs that are associated with running EVs in the fleet as opposed to the internal combustion engine vehicles. And then again, we've sort of already hit these numbers, but I did just want to highlight here, particularly on the right-hand side of the screen, the emissions comparisons that you see with using EV versus internal combustion engine vehicles in this total cost of ownership effective scenario. There's significant savings that the city can take advantage of here, even not by converting the whole fleet, but being selective about which vehicles are being converted, which is good because it means you can be strategic. It doesn't mean that you don't necessarily have to convert the entire fleet to begin making a difference. So I think that's a good important point to call out. Okay. And then just sort of finally, I did want to talk through this 100% electrification scenario that we also modeled for the city. So in this scenario, what we do is instead of just operating on that total cost of ownership basis as the recommendation threshold, we assume that every vehicle in the fleet, once it's eligible for replacement, will be electrified. And what that does is it lets us see what potential savings or deficit may be available if you were to make that conversion. And again, this report is really designed to be a starting point as we step through and get further out into the future, the predictions become a little bit less accurate. We've seen, significant savings and cost reductions come as EVs gain more adoption and as scale becomes greater and greater. Manufacturers are passing those cost savings from being able to manufacture these vehicles at greater scale onto the consumers. And we're seeing that competitive pricing is becoming, significant across all market segments. So not only is more choice becoming available for more manufacturers, but there's been increased competition driving down costs. So, some of these later recommendations as time goes on may be more attainable, and savings could potentially be even greater just based on what we're seeing in terms of market forces that are becoming available. So did want to just call out that as well. And again, I think something in particular note too, in this 100% electrification scenario, the need for DC fast chargers again increases. And so as you can see, again, that same discrepancy is there. So where we can try and get away with level 2 chargers, we do again try and do that as well to keep that total cost of ownership lower. And again, as you can see, this same sort of 100% electrification scenario, comparing it with the ICE replacement costs, we do see again that sort of same trend line. So where the years where replacements begin and where the replacements are higher, you see those higher costs associated with them. But once the conversions are complete, you'll see those. You'll be able to reap the rewards of those lower operating costs that come from making that electrification switch. Okay, I think those are sort of the main key slides that I wanted to step through, but I would love to answer any questions that you all may have.
Great, thank you so much. Councilmember Dabala.
Thank you. It's great to have a framework for thinking about this in a very structured way. And so the report as a starting point is really, really helpful. As you said, this as Daryl said, this city has a policy of moving towards zero emissions. So I'm most interested in the 100% electrification scenario. That is the city policy. It aligns with county and state policy and rebates available and so forth. So I have a couple questions and then a sort of an ultimate policy question to put to everybody. So I wanted to just double check that the assumptions that you have made in the report, because it said, I thought I read different things in different places. So you used the city's projections for when vehicles need to be replaced. That seems pretty clear. But yet you talk about 15-year lifetimes of vehicles, 8-year lifetimes. That's how you did the amortization of the costs?
Yeah, that's correct. So we worked with the city and staff to get a sense of what the retirement schedule looks like. And then we tailor each of those recommendation points and replacement points to that sort of procurement timeline and schedule. And where necessary, what we'll do is we'll look at the use of those vehicles to back into what is appropriate. So that those timelines are not just sort of bespoke, but we've worked with the team to adapt the model to what makes sense for the city based on what we saw from the data. If that's helpful, I'm not sure I quite answered that question for you.
Well, let me ask about things like the costs of maintenance. So the city has its own maintenance department. And so when you did maintenance costs, did you assume some kind of average or did you use city maintenance costs? I guess my question is how specific to Tacoma Park were some of the assumptions? Same thing with electricity costs and
yes.
Yeah, and things like that. So speak to me.
Yes. To start with the second part of that, fuel costs and electricity costs, we did work with the city to get best estimates on specific fuel contracts. We did use a standard increase rate from the historical data that we have that's based on data that we get from Argonne National Labs and their A-Fleet tool. So there is some forecasting that is happening for future looking increases, but historically, the data that we've used is from the city and based on the actual maintenance and fuel costs. I will say, just sort of generally, as a point, EVs typically do have significantly lower maintenance costs. That's largely due to the fact that they have significantly fewer moving parts, which means there's less that can break. And the drivetrains and the powertrains are significantly simplified by sort of orders of magnitude. Whereas there are thousands of moving parts, in an engine alone. EVs negate a lot of that. And so that's where a lot of those maintenance costs go. There's no oil changes. You really need wipers, new brakes, even not as frequently as ICE vehicles due to the regenerative braking, but new tires. So we factored all that in where possible. And we're attempting to work with real costs as much as possible to try and tailor that recommendation as closely to the city as possible.
So if the city has the spreadsheets and has the Excel spreadsheets and as new, my next question had to do with updating this, because as you said, prices are changing even as we're speaking, and availability is changing and all of that. So if we have the spreadsheet, we can tweak the numbers at some point to update them. How far ahead would you be recommending? 3 years, 5 years? When would you want to have the city take a fresh look at this?
Yeah, that's a great question. The market does change significantly, and it's moving at a pretty rapid clip. I think this report was largely finalized and submitted to the city staff back in November. And I think since then, actually, one of the vehicles we recommended, the manufacturer, is actually no longer on the market and available. And that's particularly the canoe vans, which we're serving, I believe in this report, as a cargo van capacity. So it changes frequently. A good part of this program that we implement with Pepco is that every 6 months, while the program is operating, you can take advantage of a report refresh. So again, we will take all the data that we've worked with you to collate and combine and run it through the model again. And based on the changes that we've made to our EV library and market availability, if any of those recommendations changes, we can provide those to you and give you an updated report based on new market conditions.
Okay, great. That's great to hear. Because I was thinking it would need a refresh pretty soon.
Yes, it does. Unfortunately, that is.
Well,
with the
but
market
it's
being
good to have it all in one place so that we can do that. That's great. So I guess the bottom line, I have a number of technical questions, but what I'd prefer to do is list them and send them to you rather than get into it here. And
Absolutely.
you could respond to me and individual council members, but the bottom lines for me, the policy issue for me is, so if the zero emission scenario shows that the full replacement over the time does break even, well, that's great news. So that means some of it from one of your graphs shows you need more money up front some of the years. So how do we get a handle on how much money we need to be saving every year in order to have that money to be able to do the 100% electrification?
Yeah, that's a great question.
So starting
there
with,
are
I think it was fiscal 28, and 25 had pretty big. Yeah, which it was in the slides, not the report. Was it fiscal 25 and 8 had big bump ups, or was it 28 and something else?
100% electrification.
Yeah.
28 and 32. I think are the two that sort of are
so
outstanding.
what do we need
Yeah.
to be putting aside so that we can make those big bump ups when they happen? Would be, how would we get a handle on that? That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, as you're stepping through, this report didn't consider any sort of alternative acquisition methods. So we operated on the sort of assumption that the vehicles are currently owned and would be owned. And we, just based on the limitations of this model, didn't have the capability to explore whether leasing might be a stopgap option.
Or buying used.
And there are some very strong leasing incentives and tax credits that are available right now that have led to some pretty attractive lease offers for vehicles that are on the market at this point. I also will say, used EVs are becoming more and more available, and they do hold up fairly well. We've seen the powertrains themselves have some fairly substantial warranties from the manufacturers, and they do seem to hold their own better than internal combustion engine vehicles, and stand up to wear and tear and use that they would see in day-to-day deployments fairly well, which is promising to see. But the cost of used EVs as they become more available has also been plummeting. So there could be options too, where between either leasing or acquiring some used vehicles as a fleet, options to even further reduce those upfront acquisition costs.
Yeah, I spot checked a couple that we bought recently or considered buying recently, with the price that you have in the report, and you seem to be generous in your estimates, which is useful because they're still cost effective even with the generous cost estimates. Last question, which I forgot to ask under data and data analysis. So I thought I read in two different places, two different things. So there are incentives and programs. You have a table of them.
Mm-hmm.
How many of them, if any, were included in the vehicle analysis for cost effectiveness?
Yes. So I think, let me just pull this up so I give you the right answer. The ones that were applied in this case were the commercial clean vehicle credit from the IRS.
Okay.
And also were included were the EV Smart charger rebates and the EV Smart Make Ready incentives from Pepco.
What about the state?
Those were the three credits that were actively applied. And I have to pull up the report to look at it. There were more that we considered, but those were the three that were immediately applicable to the city and the municipal fleet. I think there were others that maybe either funding hadn't been renewed or announced yet for this next calendar year.
Oh,
I think
okay.
that may
So
have been the
not
case.
announced yet because there's no state budget for next year yet. Okay.
Yeah.
That explains it.
But yeah, those were the ones that we know were active at the time that the report was created, and that the city was qualified to take advantage of.
Okay. Great. Thanks a lot.
I do want to ask just a quick follow-up. So was the assumption that the vehicles or the 23 would all receive those credits? Because I think one of the things that is at the forefront of my mind is the expiration of a lot of this potentially, given future.
But not the
Right.
Not the state.
Well,
Yeah, maybe.
there's
We'll see.
yeah, we'll see. Right. Everyone's dealing with money problems. So was the assumption that these, in terms of the forecasts out, that these credits would continue to be available, or only were available for year one or year two?
The forecast, I believe, was for the entire availability of the program. And so based on the statutes as they were passed and as the programs, if they were made available, we would have used and relied on that information. So any future changes that may come as a result of past legislation or administrative changes would require us to sort of go back in and reassess. That said, I'm hoping that market forces continue to drive down the cost of EVs, and hopefully we get to the point, we're very close to it, where the initial upfront acquisition cost is very, very close to getting to that break-even point where the cost of an electric vehicle is almost at parity with an internal combustion engine vehicle. And when that is the case, it almost becomes a no-brainer because the maintenance and fuel savings that you see over the lifetime of the vehicle make the total cost of ownership significantly lower.
That's the 6-month refresh.
So one question that I do have about the charging, so was the assumption more or less around having the charging stations or the fast chargers available on city property, meaning it would own, like those vehicles, we would be able to charge them while they're here locally within the city. Folks would need to go around and then come back to charge them, correct? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So we use a more conservative one-to-one recommendation for every vehicle that we would recommend in a conversion scenario, it also would get its own charger. And we do model these as private infrastructure that would be available and owned by the city, owned and operated by the city. So you certainly could have the option to take advantage of the public options that are becoming more available, or even open up some of the chargers that you install to the public as well. But for the purposes of this report, we tend to skew to a more conservative assumption where they're privately owned, privately accessible, and that each vehicle has its own charger that would be installed.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think my next question is more for Director Braithwaite. Sorry. So one of the things that I think is really useful, in terms of having this report is more lay of the land and kind of laying out options and things for us to consider. I guess my question is, how are we potentially going to leverage this data to kind of think through aspects of, to Councilmember Dabala's point, and something we've discussed, prior council members have discussed at length, how are we going to make the necessary adjustments to our ERR funds to make sure that we're putting in the necessary funds to ultimately be able to be in a position when it's time to convert, that we have those funds available. So is the idea to leverage this information to kind of look internally about some tweaks we may need to make, and then make some of those recommendations back to council?
Yeah, it's going to be a multi-step process. First and foremost, when you set the program up, as we anticipate we will and have in the past, with retirement of vehicles is when you're replacing them. So that paints the picture of when vehicles are going to become available. And then the next important thing is feasibility of the vehicle. Is it compatible? Is it available? Does it have good track record? Because we want our vehicles to be dependable. And so we'll know the schedule. We'll have a list of options, which is very helpful from what ICF has provided. The other piece of this that needs to overlay, and it's kind of a bit of a catch-22, as you all know, we have charging capability now for the 8 EVs we have. We have 3 level 2 chargers at Public Works. We have a fast charger here at the community center, as well as additional level 2 chargers. And then at the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center, we have 2 level 2 chargers. So we have charging capacity that is not exhausted at this point. So we are able to add a small number of vehicles within our existing charging capacity. That said, when do you reach the tipping point? It is associated with 2 things: the number of vehicles as well as the use of those vehicles. And as soon as we start transitioning police fleets, that's kind of that's the holy grail of figuring this out, because there's a functionality issue that's critical. Certainly with trash trucks, but most importantly with police vehicles. So my guess is we have a lot to absorb. The police department was involved with meeting with ICF, but we really haven't internally discussed all the reports and various pieces of information. We really need to go through that step by step with our police department and our chief, who has indicated very much an openness and willingness to green vehicles. We just need to make sure that it's going to work. One of the other challenges with the police department is, of course, the take-home vehicles.
Correct.
So that opens up an entirely new thing. It's not your traditional municipal fleet where cars are parked here overnight and can charge. They're parked at home. So it will, by necessity, require at-home charging for those police vehicles that are being taken home. And so we are gathering information from other jurisdictions that have that in place. There's not a whole lot of it, but there is some, because we'll need to create a policy and a plan for that in terms of what type of chargers will we place in people's homes, how will those charges be monitored. There's lots of technology that enables us to do that, but it does it does take some thinking through the steps. We're certainly not going to put fast chargers at people's houses. We're going to put the traditional level 2 chargers. And then there's the question of, like at my house, I got a 100 amp circuit. I have really trickle charging. It works because I'm a half a mile away from work. But for other staff members that have take-home vehicles and are 30 to 40 miles away from here, you're going to have a charger that's, you're going to have a 200 amp circuit, which then may require a heavy up on your home. So there's lots of different steps along the way. I'm guessing, and again, we need to really blend heads with the police department to come up with when those vehicles are retired, how we may transition more slowly into EVs. The police department does have an EV in the fleet. Michelle Holmes's vehicle is an EV. But we really need to start getting some actual experience, perhaps not starting with patrol, but with support vehicles, with radio systems and lights, and just go through reality check with how those vehicles operate, because there is concern that's been expressed by our police department that they will need fast charging on site here in addition to slow charging at home. And so we just need to determine, just exactly what our needs are going to be. So part of why I'm not panicked is we do have this slow approach over year retirement. So we're going to be able to know in our 5-year CIP, year by year, when those likely EV purchases are going to be made. And we also, because we can look and see what those 5 years means, when our expanded charging capacity is going to need to kick in. And then let me just say one more thing about charging capacity, because I've forgotten to say it before. We have submitted 3 grants for charging through the state and in partnership with Council of Governments in Montgomery County. We've been noticed that we've been awarded one. We will be eligible for almost $1 billion in charging support for a fast charger here at the community center. One of the things we're finding, and we're really anxious to get into this, is that charging costs are much higher than ICF's projections. So we're really looking forward to truthing the reality of that situation, because it seems very extreme and high to us, what we're getting quoted locally. But our own experience with fast chargers is we didn't pay anything other than the hookup charge, because it was a state program at the time when we were early adopters. And we had a program through EVI that placed that charger, and all we had to pay was the electric permit and the connectivity. That said, so we're waiting to hear from the other 2. So we're very, very hopeful that we will get good news in that regard, and that a lot of this cost for charging will be largely supported by those grants. So that will take a huge burden of cost off us. If it doesn't, then that also informs our decision-making going forward. It may slow down the process. We may need to plan ahead for funding the cost of that charger. But if nothing else, particularly after this county round, which will happen in 2025 for the fast charger here at the community center, we'll have some real world experience on cost that we haven't had before. So that will help us kind of plan and budget for that, in addition to staying in touch with ICF and understanding sort of where things are going market-wise. So
yeah, no, that's really helpful, Director Braithwaite, and thank you for bringing that up, particularly around how the electrification and the facilities we have, and also our workplace and terms and conditions of union contracts and the like that we try to make sure that we uphold. And I appreciate you talking about, because one of the things that I noticed is that there were some differences in terms of the returns by vehicle type, and some of it could have just been you got a whole bunch of them up front, but some of it could honestly be like the heavy trucks, that there just aren't cost-effective options available right now for those particular types of vehicles. So long as we're thinking about like the staged in approach, where maybe it is the case that there are certain vehicles, because they're more cost effective, or we're not necessarily dealing with some of the logistical challenges, are ripe for when they're up for electrification, whereas there may be others that we may choose to kind of prolong, just to try to see if we can get a little bit more bang for our buck and a little less break even, and still accomplish the goal of electrification.
Yeah, and to that point, I want to point out one of the appendix charts for the 100% EV electrification. It does show those financial savings over the 29 years, and you really can get a sense of what are those more cost-heavy, and certainly heavy trucks are that in large part. And again, 5 years from now, maybe that will change, and we may be looking at hydrogen. But currently, right now, as we can evaluate, we can see where those higher cost conversions will be.
Thank you. Councilmember Landman?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I want to take advantage of your willingness to respond to some detailed questions in writing because I don't want to prolong this unnecessarily. I would like to ask you, when we're looking at the cost leaps in costs in some of the out years in both of the different scenarios that you looked at, the 100% and the cost-effective one, I'm curious about other comparable municipalities, whether they have used leasing as a way to smooth out the costs, and also because given the rapidity of change in the EV marketplace, whether leasing offers you an opportunity to get, for example, improved range more quickly, or other things like where we've normally looked at an 8-year lifespan for a police car and a 15-year for other vehicles. It seems like leasing might be something that we would want to explore more deeply. So how do other cities do that? And should we be asking you for that type of analysis as a component of this? I know we're going to be looking at leasing from a cost effectiveness standpoint later on, but I'm curious about its potential effect in the scenarios that you're considering.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think we also have, unfortunately, sort of limited insight into after we make the recommendations, if cities have pursued leasing as one of the potential acquisition models to drive down those costs. But I will say, given the current IRS and EV tax credits that are available, leasing is actually, it's from that upfront acquisition cost pretty beneficial. The full tax credit is available to vehicles that are leased, and the requirements that are coming into place that dictate, where materials in the battery can come from. And as those have become more stringent on the buying side of the equation, they're not nearly as strict on the leasing side of the equation. So more vehicles tend to be eligible for those credits as well, in addition to qualifying for the full amount. So there are some potentially significant cost savings. And as you were saying, with the market changing as rapidly as it is, it can be a good opportunity to not only trial a number of different manufacturers in EVs, but as you were saying, get the latest and greatest at a potential significantly reduced cost. So it's definitely an avenue that we would recommend exploring because it could potentially see some significant cost savings.
Thank you. That's helpful to know, and I think it'll factor into our thinking, when we're looking at those big jumps in price. It's nice to know that there's a way around that, and also that it's potentially opens the door to additional savings associated with the weirdness of whether it's public institutions or private businesses who are doing the purchasing. I know that was a factor in the school bus EV decision in Montgomery County, that private leasing made it more viable.
Yes.
Another question about the transition. I know our long-term goal, not that long, but our medium to long-term goal is to be 100% electric. But I'm wondering about plug-in hybrids as a transition approach, especially for the police vehicles, where we have this issue of whether we would be needing to heavy up the home chargers and things like that. And that then, we are buying equipment that's not even anywhere. It could be 40, 50, 100 miles away from Tacoma Park. And whether plug-in hybrids is that cheating on our goal, or is that a way to get us to a lower emissions level more quickly if we consider that as a transition technology?
Yeah, absolutely. There can be some really strategic applications and uses for plug-in hybrids. I'll note that there weren't any that came out in this recommendation, just because on the total cost of ownership basis, you only see a portion of those fuel savings and not nearly as much of the maintenance savings over the lifetime of the vehicle. Because while the plug-in hybrids do give you the best of both worlds, they unfortunately also give you the worst of both worlds. So you are sort of responsible in inheriting the maintenance costs of both the internal combustion engine drivetrain and the EV drivetrain.
Yeah.
And in particular, as you were talking about the police scenario, at this point, as part of our EV model library, we didn't have any that were pursuit rated that were plug-in hybrids at the time that we did the assessment, but we know manufacturers are looking to introduce more models, and I believe Ford has also introduced a couple of new models since we conducted the assessment. So there are potential scenarios where that does make a lot of sense. And the police scenario in itself, I know we were talking about the logistical challenges of charging and long range, but it is a scenario where there can be, over the lifetime of those vehicles, significant savings, not just from the financial side of it, but in terms of CO2. And just to give you a sense, patrol vehicles that are normally idling for significant amounts of time,
Yes.
in an EV, the idling, all those emissions from sitting and having equipment active or lights active, computers, radios, whatever it might be, is handled by the EV battery pack. So there's significant emissions reductions that are possible by switching to an EV in that scenario. And we think that there certainly are scenarios where maybe range or charging are factors where the hybrids can help get you some of those benefits while idling and those reductions. But, there are some associated trade-offs that you just need to be aware of. But there certainly are scenarios where that can be, the best solution to take that next step as the infrastructure improves, as the range of the vehicles improve, and as the capabilities get better and better. Sort of counterintuitively, I think when a lot of the initial EVs came out, they were lower range and less performant. And now we're seeing, much greater ranges and performance and acceleration and handling dynamics that actually beat the internal combustion engine vehicles. So a little counterintuitively, when you can deploy an EV in a situation where it's very high utilization, that's where you'll tend to see the highest cost savings over the life of the vehicle.
Interesting. Last question. I didn't see any recommendations for sedan replacements. There were SUVs, but not sedans. We do have a number of sedans in our fleet, and that seems to be the most common type of EV that's available now. So I wonder if you could just comment on that, whether that has to do with the changeover we've made in the police vehicles that we're purchasing, or I'm not sure why, but maybe you know.
Yeah, mostly the low mileage of our cars.
Because of the low mileage? So the bang for the buck is less for the, I see. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, with the, sedans, public works, administrative vehicles, admin pool vehicles, code enforcement vehicles, so those are EVs. They just, 3,000 miles a year, 5,000 miles a year, just very, very low.
Thank you. Councilmember Honzak.
I'm not sure if I'm still trying to process the question you just asked, because I was a little distracted, but let's just see if I'm repeating it, because I did hear the response. I'm looking at the chart on about 100% electrification. I think it's slide 15. And I see that under the 100% electrification scenario, and I'm Director Braithwaite, this may be for you or maybe for our analysis team, that for example, for sedans and for also, actually, in both cases, for sedans, for police sedans and just general sedans, there's a substantially reduced number that are being recommended for electrification in spite of the fact that we're moving to 100% electrification.
Yeah,
Is that what you were just, it's not exactly what your question was, right?
No, it's a different issue.
Yeah, and the reason I just want to point out to the
already
public.
EVs.
What's that?
They're already EVs. For instance,
that's the reason.
four
Okay,
police
it's not
sedans,
that
we
we're-
have one that's an EV, so that's why only 3. And for the other sedans where there's 9, we have 6 that are already EVs, so that's why there's only
Thank you. I thought we were potentially reducing, and so comparing apples and oranges. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
that
the
is
already
actually very
existing,
helpful.
and then the last is the street sweeper. So that's where you see the 8 vehicles that are currently electric vehicles in our fleet. So they're already EV.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Councilmember Slicker.
Thank you, Mayor. Seriously, just as a point of order, how are we on time? Because I just want to be.
We need to finish this up because we still have two more things,
Great.
but I'm not seeing any other light. So, but I will just say if you could keep it to 2 to 3 questions,
Sure,
that would be
that's
great.
my intention, yeah. I'm just trying to think of just questions that might be helpful for all of us to hear the answer live. One of the things is a question about whether you're aware of any other jurisdictions, or perhaps you, Director Braithwaite, where they've actually, in the budget process, they've changed the accounting so that the ERR is somehow taking into account, because electrification becomes like a sort of an onboard thing attached to the vehicles themselves. And whether they're able to take that out of operating costs, and because you're buying charging equipment, which is a new kind of thing.
None that I'm aware of, and I don't know, Brendan, if you're following that, but because, you've got capital acquisition costs, which we experience or see in our capital budget, but then you have fuel and maintenance costs, which are in your operating budget. So those two things are very different pots of money. I am not aware, but Brendan, maybe you are, of some acknowledgement or transition funding or just budget
Yeah.
forecasting, I guess. Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not aware of any specific details from other municipalities that we worked with, but it's something I can certainly ask about. And as we follow up with you all, if there are any additional questions that we haven't gotten to today, happy to address those in writing or to come back and answer those. But I will also say, just from the perspective of our modeling, as you're looking at those total cost of ownership graphs, those will include the spend that's required for the necessary charging of that vehicle. And just to put that into sort of context, so that year one cost will include in those total cost of ownership graphs the acquisition of the vehicle and the installation of the chargers. So as you make that transition and install the necessary infrastructure throughout the transition, ideally it's a one-time cost, and then as future vehicle upgrades need to take place as the fleet ages and retires out and new vehicles are phased in, hopefully those costs will then be not necessary. I'm sure there over the lifetime of the vehicles, maybe replacements, maintenance, and things that will need to happen to the chargers themselves, but those should be significantly reduced costs compared to the infrastructure work that would need to go in to install those chargers and the initial acquisition cost of the charging hardware itself.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So that leads me to my one follow-on question, which kind of brings together a lot of things. So we're asking about whether we're leasing or buying, and thinking about, like, I too would love to see us get to 100% electrification as quickly as possible. So I'm wondering whether, given the uncertainty about regulations, like, what would you say to a municipality or jurisdiction that was saying, hey, let's go big on fast chargers in our capital budget early, like now, and then just have, because it seems like that is a tipping point in terms of maybe we can't get as many police cruiser SUVs as we want because we're like, we don't have enough fast chargers. So is there an argument to be made for, like, focusing on fast chargers early?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think it's good to be strategic about the infrastructure needs. And that comes from a number of different factors. So, installing necessary chargers where you have excess capacity and electrical capacity maybe is a way that you can offset perhaps some upgrade costs, be strategic in that way. And in the report, you'll find that in that full electrification scenario, we have modeled out what the total demand increase would be needed to not only install those chargers, but meet the demand of those vehicles. But I think just sort of as a guiding principle, when you're thinking about these infrastructure changes, it's good to be thinking in the long term, and important to just keep in mind that I think general trends sort of will hold true. The lower powered chargers will remain to be more affordable. DC fast chargers will likely always be at a significant cost premium. And so where you can be strategic, whether that's with operational changes or leverage, public charging infrastructure that's becoming more available for quick top-ups. There are definitely ways that you can adjust your operations to maybe reduce that initial spend on infrastructure itself.
Yeah, and if I could just point out a couple of things, and I appreciate your time, is actually in the report currently as provided, our police vehicles do not have fast chargers associated with them as a need. They're all take-home chargers, level 2. Internally, we've been talking a lot about that, and we definitely feel, for a variety of reasons, we do need a fast charger on site dedicated to police vehicles. But I just wanted to point that out, that based on the analysis and the numbers, the police vehicle fleet is not the one that's causing the fast charging needs. It's actually trash trucks, based on the analysis. But That being said, this is all information we're getting, we're truthing it, we're reality checking it with our own needs. So we're massaging it as well, and we'll be looking to other jurisdictions. So I just wanted to throw that out there. The police vehicle issue is not actually the fast charging nugget, though we think that it will definitely play a part. And lastly, just related to your question of costs and how jurisdictions may do it, the only thing I wanted to point out, kind of a similarity to me, is when we converted our streetlights to LED. There was a big cost up front, almost $300,000 to do it. Council and the public had to trust us that the energy savings was going to come. And so what we did is we tracked that, so we can provide you month by month, year by year, energy level savings. We can show it, but we had to take the leap. I don't know if you're aware, but we have tons of data on our fleet, and we have, every time it's repaired, what the cost is, what the fuel is per vehicle. We do reports, so we know all our maintenance and fuel costs per vehicle in the city. So we have that base data that we'll be able to roll it out and see, what is the savings in maintenance costs? What has the savings been in fuel on a vehicle by vehicle basis? So it's one of those things where you have to take the plunge, but we will have the data because we have historic data and we'll continue to record it. We'll be able to see whether our predictions were true.
Yeah, and I will say, just in terms of the LED street conversion, the fact that we got in early means we got one heck of a deal.
Yeah.
And other municipalities are trying to do it now, and the program that we were able to leverage is not necessarily as lucrative as it was when we converted over. Councilmember Schlegel, did you have another
It was
question?
just, so we do have the take-home program, and I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly. Is it a one-to-one situation where each officer has their vehicle that they drive in and drive out? So just when Brandon, when you spoke about operational changes, in theory, you could say you will have a vehicle to take home, but it could be one that's just been charging for the last couple hours and not the one you drove in this morning. Although that would be a change. I just wanted to point that out. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Not seeing any more lights. Thank you very much. This has been a really wonderful report and has given us a lot of information to think about, and also I really love the opportunity that we will be able to draw on you again to update these numbers to kind of help us as we try to fine tune our approach. So thank you so much.
And I did want to point out, and I apologize, because we've gone through this process, it makes us eligible for funding through the Pepco EV Smart program. So some significant funding for both chargers and fleet purchase. So good things to come.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you again. This was an excellent presentation, and I'm sorry I kept you up past 9:30.
No worries. It was our pleasure. We look forward to collaborating with you all in the future. I'm glad we were able to provide some hopefully useful insights and to help make this process and this transition a little easier.
Great. Definitely. Well, thank you so much. Okay, colleagues, do we need a break or can we power through the next couple of items? I think should be relatively short. Okay. All right, so we're going to move into our work session, planning for review of state legislation and establishment of a bill review working group. So I don't have a slide presentation because I figure I could just talk you all through it. So in the past, what we've done as council, for folks who are not aware, we all have heard and met Ann Seacott, who is our legislative lobbyist in Annapolis. And what Ann does is she puts together a massive spreadsheet, a matrix that basically highlights and provides all of the various bills that are currently making their way through Annapolis. She goes through the process of really thinking through what our priorities are to try to pinpoint the bills that are more relevant to the city of Takoma Park. However, because of the speed in which the bills and the hearings come forth, it's often really helpful for us and has proven to be effective for us to have a small council working group that is dedicated to doing rapid review of the bills, meeting with Ann weekly to try to identify those bills that we want to make sure that we're developing testimony or may need to go to Annapolis to testify on. And also working with staff to just make sure that we're all on the same page and tracking the appropriate bills. Now, I'm usually a part of that, not usually, I am a part of that process from afar because I'm watching and then I'm writing testimony and I may need to go down to Annapolis. But it's really helpful when we have a few members of our council that are dedicated to reviewing that matrix on a regular basis. Now, what I should say is, regardless of whether or not you're in the working group, if there are specific areas that are of interest to you, immigration, LGBTQ+, policing, those kinds of things, it's perfectly fine. We can let Ann know, and she will make sure that when those types of bills, whether you're on the working group or not, come forth, you'll have an opportunity to review them. And if there's any thoughts around weighing in and the relevance to the city of Tacoma Park, you can do that. Also, I should note that everyone will have access to the spreadsheet with all of the bills, whether you're a part of the working group or not. But the hope is that the folks that are a part of the working group are the ones that are really committed to following what's going on with various bills, meeting with Ann, meeting with staff, meeting with myself, so that we can make sure that we have appropriate coverage as it relates to writing and kind of getting testimony out the door. This working group usually will need to consist of no more than 3 members of council. And Councilmember Dabala has been on this group for a while, so I'm very appreciative that she's volunteered to be on it again to kind of help with kind of making sure that newer council members kind of get the swing of things quickly. But I would be interested in getting volunteers. You don't have to announce publicly right now, but if you just want to, you could. I don't want to put people on the spot, but you could just shoot me an email if that's something that you're interested in, because we're really trying to finalize the working group and kind of bring folks together so we can kind of talk through the process.
The session started today.
Because the session started today. We missed the big reception. And it goes pretty fast and heavy. If folks could just shoot me an email by the end of the week if it's something that you're interested in, and I can follow up with you all to just answer any questions. Councilmember Dabala has offered to answer any questions as well so that we can go ahead and solidify the members. Are there any questions?
I have 2 quick questions,
Yes,
if I may.
Councilmember Landon.
Question number 1, can you estimate the number of hours you're spending on any given week on this? And question number 2, does your weekly meeting occur during working hours or in the evenings?
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
you know, the thing is it's like you really can't, because it's like trickle and flood. Like sometimes you're looking at the matrix and there isn't really much there. And then all of a sudden bills and testimonies start to drop, and then you're cranking stuff out. I will say, one, Ann is extremely, extremely flexible in terms of meeting with the working group to discuss what's going on. So she can, I've had to meet with her in the evenings, kind of in the late afternoons, 5 o'clock time, to just bring folks together. I will say for hearings and testimonies, those happen during business hours. Sometimes you can go to Annapolis, sometimes you can do them virtually.
Sometimes you can just do them, if I may interrupt.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So on the weeks when it's just scanning the matrix, going to the meeting, right? But the matrix is, you know, hundreds of bills. And so going through that, the first couple weeks is not the first couple of weeks, the first few weeks that when the bills all get filed is a lot, and then it trickles off. And then writing testimony, testimony is a page. It's not a book. but depending on who's doing it and how well they know the subject. And we did what, I don't know, maybe a dozen last
we did
year,
maybe a
something like
dozen
that,
of
not 50 pieces of testimony. And it is also possible to write depending on Anne's advice, you can write the testimony and submit the testimony, not necessarily show up in person or virtually to deliver it. Depends on what they're looking for, and every bill's different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, if it's, for example, the speed limit bill, sending the police chief instead of a council member. Depends. There's a lot of, we don't really know, but the base is every week, the meeting and the looking at the report, looking at the matrix, and if you do it like I do it, checking in with a couple people to see, is this important or not? You have to read a few of them. Let's say there's 5 housing bills. Well, you might have to read them, and some of them get, you've read legislation.
Yeah. And I will say, with time, you get pretty good at figuring out this is relevant to us, this is not. And Anne also does a good job of those once we identify are not really relevant. The ones that are relevant that we want to track, she'll keep those, and then the ones that's not relevant. So it gets a little easier throughout the course of the session, not at the start, but as you're moving through the session to know what you're tracking and what you're keeping an eye on, and what may is not relevant or what dies.
And for the city, so there might be bills that I would be really interested in and thinking are really important, but they might not be of direct relevance to the city. So there's a screen there to keep in mind that limits the number of bills that we get to where we are submitting tests. It limits the number of bills where at the end of the day we're submitting testimony.
Right.
It is very interesting, but it's a lot in a short time.
Yep. Okay, so again, if you are, Councilmember Schlegel?
Yeah, I'm just thinking we're restricting it to bills that they're making it through the preliminary stages. They're looking like there's promising of passage, and we're trying we're trying to do one piece of testimony that represents the general sense of the council in each of these cases. Great. Does it ever get, when you get into March and whatnot and things are moving along, do you ever just go kind of like, let's go all hands on deck? Like if anybody wants to help write a piece of testimony, you can do that?
We've done that. I will say sometimes it's not necessarily everybody writes testimony, but it may be there's a bunch of things that may just happen for scheduling purposes to require people to testify. And hey, I'm not available. Can you read this testimony in my stead and the like? So I haven't seen it be the case where everyone's all hands on deck. It's usually paced a little because we have to do the screening. It could be that way if you're basically thinking that everything is applicable and we need to speak on everything. But if you're judicious when you're going through all of the bills and really focusing on those that you think may have the greatest impact to the city, it then narrows things down quite a bit. But sometimes we do have to rely on others who may be willing to go to Annapolis or testify, or if it's something that maybe the working group is just swamped with other things or it's related to a topic that we know you care about, pinging someone that's outside of the working group to say, hey, do you mind writing the testimony for this particular topic? But again, when you're writing the testimony, you're leveraging information directly from the city, resolutions or language from resolutions that we've already passed, restating why we support a particular bill. So it's not, as Councilmember DeBala mentioned, you have 3 minutes. So it's like, is it 3 minutes? It's so quick. You have a page and a half tops. Okay. So again, if it's something that you are interested in participating in, please just shoot me a note, please, because we gotta get everybody situated so that we're all organized and can kind of bring things together with Anne so we can know what the next steps are. Any final questions on that agenda item? Okay. All right. So with that, we're going to turn things over to Councilmember Dabala, who's going to talk through our last work session item, introduction to city boards and committees, council committee liaison, and establishment of a working group to review applications.
Yeah, and I'm doing the talking because I have been on this. You're going to be familiar with the concept of working group here pretty quickly by the end of the evening. But I've been on this working group for several years. Not that I need to continue, but I can explain it perhaps fairly quickly. So tonight, I want to give you a little background on the committee system overall and the roles of council in connection with our standing committees and boards. And then we want to decide on an appointments working group and recruitment, and decide on committee liaisons, again, maybe not right on the spot, but getting people to volunteer by email once you've had a chance to think it over. And there are some loose ends, but I think we're not going to do them tonight. So the current council system, the city council appoints 11 groups. There's 6 standing committees and 5 boards and commissions. The difference, committees are advisory. Boards and commissions have decision-making function, like the tree commission, like the Board of Elections. They're quasi-judiciary, quasi-regulatory, whatever, independent from the council. Most of them have very similar membership requirements, terms, and then they all have issue-specific charges, what they're supposed to be doing. The council makes appointments twice a year. For those of you who are taking notes, if you want me to just send you the notes in the morning, I can do that. I didn't think to hand them out, but maybe it would have been a good idea. You do have a list of, thank you, Jesse, of the council-appointed boards and committees, and a statement which says that the application deadline for this semi-annual is January 10th. One of the things that we want to decide tonight is to take the clerk's recommendation to make that a little, since this is the 7th, make it a little more, push it back a week. Okay, so back to the current system. So semi-annual appointments, that means semi-annual recruitment, looking for people to do this. The committees have 7 to 9 residents and 2-year terms and a 6-year total limit. The boards are mostly smaller, 5 to 7 members and 3-year terms. There is a code of conduct that individual committee members sign. There's training through the city staff. There's stipends for people who need it for childcare or whatever. And there are also 2 police-related groups that are partly or completely appointed by the police chief, and in one case, part of the group is appointed by the council. I'm including in this the youth council, which runs on a different schedule, but which is also council appointed. And in 2021, we did, the previous council did an evaluation of all the groups, because there were more, and looked to make the whole system more effective, to meet the current needs, because some of these were chartered decades ago and may or may not have been relevant anymore. And maybe not most importantly, but importantly, to make participation that better reflects the total population of the city, because that was a problem. So what's the council role in all of this? To make the appointments, to recruit members. There are committees, and we need to be active in bringing people in to serve on these committees. And it's a great opportunity to engage people and give them a chance to do something more that's quite, fulfilling, but also not as burdensome as a lot of other things. We, in theory at least, hear from each group once a year, because they're reporting to us, and they're advising us. So it's on us to listen to them. we can appoint temporary task forces, as you heard the reference earlier to the former Sustainable Banking Task Force. There's a long story there. I can tell anybody tomorrow who wants to know about it, but that's an example of a temporary task force. And we have recently had committee liaisons, individual council members who will be the liaison from the council to a particular committee. So let's take these one at a time. So recruitment, Jesse can or has provided information. You're going to do it electronically, right? To get it out about, would you hand it out tonight, please? Yeah. Email that to people so that you have the information. And in particular, this time round, it's recreation and grants review that need the most people. And in general, that have the most vacancies. And in general, it's wards 4, 5, and 6 that are underrepresented. And so just putting that out there for you to think about how you approach that. Most of the groups are doing okay or better. Some of them are doing great. And the issue really is that now we have term limits, so we've got some bodies we need to fill. And I should say, Councilmember Hanzak, if you've got anything to say, you just chime in, because she's been on the group too. And we'll make that January 10th deadlines January 17th. Give everybody another week, if that's okay with council and the mayor. Okay. All right. So the working group primarily focuses on reviewing the folks, reviewing the applicants, and making recommendations for appointments. So we have been lucky enough to have situations where there's more people applying than there's space to accommodate. That's a great situation to be in. We got 5 people from Ward 2 and 1 person from Ward 6. All things being even, we would not take 5 people from Ward 2. So that's the kind of thing that needs to get sorted through. And that's one of the benefits of doing it as in mass rather than every time there's a space looking for one person, because you get a better sense of how the groups will function, how the balance will be when you see who's on it and where the gaps are, what kind of skills are missing. You can get a better sense of it. What was I saying? So there is a set of criteria that the previous group developed, that you'd want to read, confirm, make sure that's still how we want to do it. But there is already a set of criteria for how to balance this out that can be that you can work with if you want to be on this group. And sometimes the group is asked to tackle special issues, such as the fact that we are due once again to do a temporary council compensation committee. So either we ask the working group to come up with that, or we just, one person, probably Jesse, writes it and proposes it to the full council. So every 4 years, we're supposed to do a compensation committee because we can't do it, look at our own compensation. That doesn't sound right. So there's an independent group you set up to do it for you. So that's a statutory thing. That would be an example of something that might get assigned to this group. But generally, it's twice a year, recruitment, appointments, recommendations, recruitment applicants' recommendations. So, so the first thing was extending the deadline. The second thing related is who wants to serve on this committee. Email to the mayor, because we need 3 people. And then we talk about community liaisons. This is the other thing, if you're interested in, to email the mayor. And this is only for the advisory committees, not for the boards and commissions, because as I said earlier, they are independent. They're making decisions independent of us. So having a liaison is not a great move. A liaison is an observer, not a participant. You attend 1 or 2 meetings a year. You're in touch with the chair of the committee. You'd be surprised how many questions come up about council process and procedure and what we've already had a policy on and what we haven't and those kinds of things. So that's the role. It's not to be a member of the committee. And as I said, there are a couple of loose ends, but we'll just put them aside for now, I think. And that's it.
Yeah.
Questions, comments?
Yeah, thank you so much, Councilmember Davala. And I will say thank you very much to Councilmember Honzak, who has agreed to help with serving as the senior council member on this particular.
Oh, why didn't you do this?
Well, I already had you hemmed up.
Yeah, they did a good job. I'm fine.
But
I can't believe I just called the hat called senior.
yes,
2 years.
2 years in.
Yeah.
But thank you, Councilmember Honzak, for agreeing to serve on this committee. And so that means we do need 2 more members. Councilmember Honzak, I see you.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick plug, and I'm going to lean over here to my colleagues to my right. So we, as she mentioned that, well, actually, let's see. Yes, both of you from wards 4 and wards 6. You know, one of the insights I had as I sat on this committee was just that we made a lot of progress as a city, as a council. And this precedes my time on the council. When I think when stipends were offered, and they did a review of what ways they might go about trying to improve recruitment, improve retention, et cetera. And we looked at some of the data, and it really made a big difference. But I think one of the ways in which it's challenging is that time is money, and a lot of folks that are in our wards, maybe it's not as easy to spend volunteer hours. But we all know what a difference it makes in kind of what we can do for our city. And I think my observation is that, at least in my ward, I'll even speak to myself. I don't come from a place where this is part of governance. So this is a whole new model for me. Never heard of it before I came here, even though I was here for 20 years. And so I suspect a lot of people don't even know this exists or what it's all about. I think it would be awesome to have at least one of you serving, and of course anybody's welcome. But I just think it would be particularly great. It was a great experience for me to be able to really see deeply into how the system works and really explain to my fellow residents and my constituents, this is my experience. Hey, I'm on the committee. This is what really happens behind the scenes. So anyway, making a plug.
Thank you, Councilmember Honzak. Councilmember Landman.
Yes, thank you. I do want to say these committees have, in the past, they've been a way that it was people's, I'll call it gateway drug to city government participation, right? Yeah. I think Casey Koscheck also, and maybe me too, although my committee was suspiciously dismembered, no.
Yeah, somehow it became a temporary task force.
It disappeared after my leadership. So you can take whatever you want from that. But I have 2 questions quickly. One is that one of these committees lists non-residents as members, and I wanted to know if there's any guidance on that or policy, because especially if there's recruitment issues. So maybe one of you could touch on that. Maybe that's Councilmember Honzak, because she got the free ride earlier. And the second is that there was a mention this evening of the former Sustainable Finance Group that existed. And there has also been, in my ward at least, quite a bit of angst over the elimination of the Nuclear Free Committee. Those 2 might be one and the same, I'm not sure. And then there has been, in conversations with the new city manager, I should stop calling him new here in 2025, the potential of establishing a citizens advisory committee on the budget generally, and whether that was something that was I don't know if that was, the forum was intended to substitute for that, but I know that there are people interested in citizens' input opportunity with respect to the development of the budget. So I guess my question is, those things, if we wanted to bring them to the city council to make proposals of that nature, maybe through motions or something like that, could we do that would that be sort of compatible with maybe in the second recruitment season, we could look at those, or maybe you could reflect on how these committees have come and gone over the years. Thank you.
So, first, if it is a council-appointed committee, not a task force, it would require a resolution and it requires a change to our charter or code, whichever one it is. It is important that when we're talking about establishing a city committee, keeping in mind that it is long-standing. And one of the reasons, because I was a part of one of the first, I guess the first committee on committees, there were some committees that had not really had it was just basically the same people cycling over and over and over again. And they weren't really clear on what they were charged with doing. I will say that I've personally felt that we've gotten greater participation from a more diverse group of people when we do task force. I saw it with the public safety task force. I saw it with the sustainable banking. They're short. It's easier for people who have less time to be able to commit for a shorter amount of time to kind of buckle down and get things handled than it is for people to commit for some 2 years or 3 years. And so that was one of the things that is important to keep in mind. So when you are establishing a committee, you need to really think hard about whether or not it's something, and will we have work for them, and will we need their input for an extended period of time? Which is why there's also the liaison idea, was because committees, folks were out there working and they didn't really feel like they were doing things that the council really needed them to do beyond that initial ask. So that's one thing. And I will say that some committees were eliminated due to consistent multi-year problems with recruitment. Consistent. Multi-year problems with recruitment. And so it gets to a point where we have to be, and I know that we often talk about being fiscally responsible, but one of the most valuable things that we have that we are responsible for managing is our staff's time. And if our staff have to, because each committee requires staff time to devote to it, and yet if we have a committee where there's a constant recruitment issue, it's not necessarily meeting the criteria of what we've held dear as a council around what we want the committees and the feedback to look like, and we have staff that it's really, it could be a bit of a drain, not in a bad way because we're committed to it, but at a certain point, if we keep seeing that there isn't a widespread interest in the community on a topic in which a committee has been appointed, we have to ask ourselves, is this the right committee? And so that's one of the things that when we went through this process of really reviewing the charters and developing ethics language and really trying to take a good hard look at all of our committees to see, do they have a clear charge? What are they working for? Should they be a long-standing committee? Those were a number of the things that we did, and what are some of the recruitment tools that we need to develop in order to kind of get over some of these hurdles with recruitment, was some of the things that the prior council did when we were undertaking this process to really think strategically about how we're asking our residents to spend their time serving the city and whether or not we're getting the necessary value. So when there is a discussion around a committee, I think it is really, really, really important to not just try to make it as a motion, because you need to also think through the charge of that committee, what they would be responsible for. Is it something that's longstanding? That is something that would require some aspects of a code change that would ultimately need to be reflected and making sure that it's not duplicative. So if there are discussions around the creation of new committees, I think it is important for that discussion to kind of happen. And one of the things that we have leveraged is the Committee on Committees to kind of broach that conversation with the council. So when they have their presentation is, hey, we've heard that there's interest in having a committee on dog walking. Here are some of the things that we've thought through in terms of the value, whether or not there are other committees that are focused on aspects of dog walking, and then kind of presenting that back to the council so that the council in its entirety can kind of think through the value and approach to getting that particular question or that particular need addressed. So that is something that I would definitely want to make sure that we keep in mind when it comes to establishing committees. Now, when it comes to task force and recommendations from the task force, that is something that has been tricky for prior councils to deal with, and sometimes the recommendations may take a year, 2 years, and the like to ultimately implement. Some of our committees have, I know the Public Safety Task Force had like 50 recommendations. The Safe Streets Committee, I can't remember how many they had. And there's instances where there are things that the staff are doing to address all of those recommendations. It's just not always the case that they come back and we talk about them openly as a council. I think that's something that we can commit to doing, like making sure that in addition to making sure that the committees come back to the council once a year, that we have scheduled updates to some of the, which we did for the Complete Streets, which led to some of the changes that we're seeing now in terms of not having a petition-based approach to traffic calming. But making sure that we're taking stock of those recommendations from prior task force with an eye for updates from the council and also for the community in terms of where we are with implementing them. And I just want to make sure I didn't miss another question. Okay, Councilmember Dabala, I see your light first.
Yeah, this is just to follow up on Councilmember Landman's question. I have a request of the deputy city manager. So a resident asked this question earlier. I'm wondering if you could ask Director Chung to just do a paragraph, not a book, just a quick answer to where they are on the Sustainable Task Force recommendations. The last I heard was maybe 6 months ago. She sent me a note. And I can't remember if she sent everybody the same note, but it was just a quick update on where we were. And I didn't realize she was even still actively engaged in it. So that was great. So so I can say with some confidence that it's still on their radar screen. But I don't know what the status is, whether some of the bigger accounting issues that had to get settled first before we could do the sustainable banking recommendations, whether that's been resolved yet. And so I would appreciate knowing the answer to that question.
You'll get a message from Director Chung.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And then I'll pass that on, or you'll pass that on. One of us will.
Yeah, we
get
can make
with-
sure they're being
Yeah.
sent out to. Councilmember Schlegel?
Yeah, thank you. So Councilmember Dabal, you just asked about the sustainable finance. And I know that was something that Susan Rogers from Ward 2 had brought up. So that's great. I had a similar question about where things are with that. I also wondered, because a resident wrote to me this week and said, the police chief's advisory committee seems to be like, it's like different. It's like Sesame Street, which one of these doesn't belong, because it's only partially consisting of members that we vet and approve. I'm probably not using the right language for that. And so I did hear, and I see in the agenda that there was a recommendation at one point for a public safety committee, which I assume would be more according to code and resolution, a council appointed committee. And I wondered whether we are going to be revisiting that
That's a good question.
recommendation at some point.
Yeah, the Chiefs Advisory Committee, and I need to go back and just quadruple check all of my notes from the Public Safety Task Force and the Chiefs Advisory Committee. So the Chiefs Advisory is not a traditional council appointed committee. However, it did consist of, at the time, many of some of the key thought leaders around public safety were on, because I remember Christy Lopez was on it. Like there was a lot of, very, very knowledgeable folks that were on that committee versus establishing, and I do recall having a conversation with them about, we had a conversation with the Chiefs Advisory Committee about the possibility for the creation of another committee or a council committee. And at the time, the feedback was one of, they did consider themselves to be quite objective and independent in terms of the feedback that they provide to the chief. And so kind of questioned whether or not a separate public safety task force would be to some degree duplicative of what they were already, or the service or resources they were already providing to the chief. But, we can definitely go back and take a look at those recommendations, and maybe with the who ultimately agrees to participate in the Committee on Committees, if that is conversations that you all would like to just follow up with the chief about in terms of that structure and whether or not it still works. I know that we had at length conversations with the committee as well as the chief about whether or not the Chiefs Advisory Board was one that should be done away with in order to have a resident council appointed committee, and ultimately landed on the thought that it could potentially be duplicative given who we saw were already participating on that committee.
Okay, yeah, thanks
So-
for that.
May I
Go ahead,
just?
yeah.
So what I'm hearing tonight is that there are several potential new or revitalized or whatever committee ideas floating out there. And so the question would be, is this, do you want to assign this as a topic to the working group?
I think that for the working group, instead of the idea of a new committee, like first we got to find out who's going to be on it. And then it sounds more to me like there are questions regarding the status of task force reports and recommendations, some of which included the establishment of committees, and whether or not that's something that the working group wants to revisit and to see whether or not they want to make recommendations regarding the establishment. I know.
All right, that sounds good.
Yeah. There were different, I know that the committee was one of the Public Safety Task Force recommendations. There was a committee that was part of the sustainable banking, or there was some points around the nuclear free, but then there was also some other discussions around committees there. So I think it might be beneficial to have the Committee on Committees take a look at and just refresh themselves with some of the prior task force recommendations to see whether or not we need to make them agenda items going forward.
That sounds like yes.
That's great. This has been a really, really helpful discussion, and there's a lot of interest among residents who I've talked to about how this all works. And the idea of public safety, just as a holistic thinking about public safety, could be different from what the chief is needing from his advisory committee. For example, we're doing a walk around in Pinecrest this weekend to look at lighting and a number of issues that people are concerned about that all relate to safety, and traffic flow and things like that. So the only other thing I wanted to say was, I see a lot of vacancies from 4, 5, and 6, and as a Ward 3 person, I'm very excited to see those vacancies filled, and I wanted to know, can we agree on some kind of protocol? So for me as a Ward 3 council member, if I know people in another ward, should I reach out directly, or would you like me to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you might want to talk to this person, or
Councilmember Honzak?
can't speak for my fellow council members, but I think encouraging anyone who you think either has the skills or has an interest in those issues to step up is, in my ward at least, would be incredibly useful. I mean, part of the challenge is really getting the word out and spending the time with an individual person to sort of sensitize and educate about like what this is all about. So if you are willing and able to take the time with somebody who you think is interesting, maybe hopefully they'll pass the message on to even others when they talk to them. I think it's really takes quite a bit of time.
Sure. And are there any other channels of recruitment beyond advertising and whatever we all can do? Like, are there outreaches to associations or other civic organizations to say, hey, just wanted to push this out there? Maybe that's a question for you, Ms. Carpenter.
That's a good question. We've relied a lot on the council in terms of getting that word out to those kinds of groups, and I haven't directly done that kind of interface with the various groups in the city. So there probably is a bit of a gap there.
And I will say there's a lot of communities that have various listservs, and it's been a bit tricky for staff when it comes to being able to post things on various listservs as mechanisms of communication. And I think that's why, it's really important for council members to make sure that if you have, listserv notices or email blasts that go out, also encourage neighborhood association leaders within your respective communities to please sign up for things like the Tacoma Insider or things like that ping that they can kind of help to blast out on their listservs as well, because a lot of times staff will put together really nice newsletters around things that are happening in the city, and so there's also a really great way to just make sure that word gets out. I will say for me personally, the best recruitment tool has been topics that people care about. I could probably tell you right now, if there was a traffic committee for the city and you just dropped city committee traffic on particular listservs in Ward 6, we would flood this entire room. So it's a bit of a, just trying to identify those residents that may have particular interests in particular topics, but also making sure that we're kind of putting those email blasts out so people are knowing that we are looking for folks. And really, 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 particularly for wards 4, 5, and 6, saying, I don't have a rep. Like, we look bad because we don't have a rep. And usually that will kind of get folks to say, all right, fine. Councilmember Honze.
Yeah, I'll add that when I had the most luck with recruitment was the first round when I was the most energetic, I think, in year one, is I did something like, thank you for this list, this great list that shows you exactly how many vacancies and from which ward. And I sent something like that, but in red, I put like, there's no one on such and such committee related to this topic from our ward. What do you think about that? And suddenly we got several people who applied for those topics because they were interested in the topic. So, but also they, people were like, golly, I want my ward represented in that, on those kinds of issues, So I think coming straight from your mouth is very valuable.
All right, Councilmember DeBala.
Yeah, just one more comment. As we've been doing it, wards 4, 5, 6 is kind of, it's not by ward. That's a shorthand for saying not just single family white homeowners who are of a certain age. Yeah, to pick on myself.
We know who you're talking about.
Yeah, just to, and generally, I would appreciate it if someone reaches out to somebody in Ward 2 that they let me know so that I know what's going on, so I'm not blindsided. But yes, the more the merrier here.
Okay, Councilmember Landman.
I hope I'm not flogging a dead horse here. I understood very clearly from what you said, Madam Mayor, about how committees require, if you were to create a new one, a motion, amendments to probably the ordinance or the charter. I'll have to look into that. But I'm left a little bit confused about task forces. Is that something that is done by motion rather than by a motion and a proposed amendment to language in the ordinances or the charter?
No, so task force are not included in the charter, but they are established through resolution.
Resolution.
So,
Okay,
yes, so
resolution.
all are established through, are the committees established through ordinance?
Yes.
Yes. So the committees are established through an ordinance. Task force are established through resolution.
Okay. And so,
And it still is the case, even for a task force, that you want to be specific about what it
charge,
is
yeah,
that they are doing.
okay, so you would, that would be the kind of thing that might potentially meet needs with when we have a specific thing that we want to charge people with, but we don't see a long time need for a lifelong commitment or even a multi-year
commitment.
Okay, thank you.
Would it help to offer a couple of examples, maybe of what we did in the last 2 years? Like we had the city manager task force council member.
Yeah, and I think I would have to go back and check some of the prior. I'm thinking about some of the presentations that maybe when Casey was on.
Flip through. What was the question?
For the Complete Streets Committee, we were given a specific charge to make recommendations for changes to the code and ordinances with respect to, the process for traffic calming and sidewalks. But it was a charge, sounds more like what you envisioned for task forces going
Correct.
forward, but it was quite specific and it was sort of done and dusted, and then we were done.
You were done. And 'cause that was before the changes. And so in the first committee on committees, it was myself and I believe Councilmember Kosiak, and I can't remember who was our other person, but that was one of the case studies. We were like, no, if it is something that we need to bring people together to do something quick, give us a report, give us some recommendations, that's a task force. But if you want something that's standing over time, maybe they have a standing need, because what we had heard, because it went through the process, I believe there was also work that was done talking to the various committees and talking to folks.
Survey.
Yeah, we did a survey and everything. A lot of times committee members didn't know what to do next. Like they didn't know. And so it then became a little bit contentious, because it's like, I'm here volunteering, but I don't have a charge or a purpose, and the council isn't asking us for anything. So that was one of the reasons why we said, okay, let's go through all of these committees, and the ones that aren't really, we don't have a clear need for them right now. We don't have, or there are other issues that are happening. Let's go ahead and sunset some so that we can then take a fresh look at what are the committees that we need versus when are those instances where a task force would be more appropriate. Councilmember Schlegel?
Yeah, that was my thought, was that maybe it would be a healthy thing to do an ordinance that sunsetted committees on some kind of stair-stepped, what's the word for it? So they would force us or future councils to say, all right, this one's come around for renewal, still need it, and it wouldn't offend people that they'd been fired from being on the committee,
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and I think that's something that we should definitely think about if establishing a committee in the resolution. If you're like, hey, this is something that's good for a couple of years, there's some committees like grants management that we kind of know.
we're going to be looking for grants for quite a while.
It's a committee.
It's advisory, because this council makes budget.
Yeah, but then it's a subtle nuance, but there's some, like the green team,
You're going to have that.
that you're going to have it. There are some that are like the grants that you're going to have it, but then there are others that sometimes we establish. And if the council that established the committee doesn't have a clear understanding of what that committee's role is going to be, and they're fitting a need that is a standing need in the city, that's when you run into the problem of, oh, okay, we asked them to do one thing. Yeah, we asked them to do one thing, and now what do we want them to do next? And it's not necessarily related to a standing need or function in the city.
Yeah, so just to close it out, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the way you're talking about the beauty of the task force, and I think that one of the things that has surfaced in my experience or other people's experience with the task forces is there's a lot of energy because you know there's a time limit and there's a product, but then there's a sadness and a frustration because you don't know what happened. And maybe if we could schedule in our very tight schedule of the year, like a task force reunion night once a year, where anybody who's been on task force can come and hear what's been the fate of that thing, does it still live in some way, or is it closed out, that would actually energize people, I think, to serve on those kinds of groups even more than the fact that, hey, I'm in, I'm out, I got something done,
No, I think that's a great idea. Okay. All right. So just as a reminder, I need volunteers. So we got Councilmember Honzak lined up, but thank you, Councilmember Honzak. But we need 2 more folks who will be willing to volunteer for the Committee on Committees. And if you could please just shoot me an email so that we can go ahead and finalize our working groups. All right. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? And we are actually going to be able to get out of here by 10:30.
Is it okay if people shoot everybody the email so that we know that they are interested? And if they're on their
Yep, that's fine, so long as you're not replying back to one another.
Yeah, okay.
To the group.
When will we discuss the liaisons to the committees?
That is something that the Committee on Committee, I will have a conversation with the Committee on Committee. Can I have a conversation with the Committee on Committee or the lead of the committee? We'll figure it out because I got to make sure I keep it to not having 4.
I misunderstood.
No, the question was about the liaisons when we come back and talk in greater detail about the role of the liaisons and the assignments.
I thought we kind of covered that,
But they still need to have assignments. So committee assignments. It's okay. It's all right. It's okay. Councilmember Honzak.
If I may.
Volunteers now for that?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, but just to clarify what was done in the past, which doesn't mean that that's necessarily what we do in the future, but we sort of talked about which committees, because you wouldn't want to liaison with some of the commissions, right? But for the committees, we just talked about who might want to do what, and then we all just went around asking. And it was all sort of done collaboratively. So if that works again, that would be great.
Oh, as opposed to just take volunteers right now.
Right.
Okay, I misunderstood.
No worries. Councilmember Schlegel.
So before you gavel down, do you need a motion to change the deadline on the applications, or is that just?
Do we need a motion?
I just made up the deadline in the
Yeah,
first place.
yeah. So I don't think.
Darn. Okay.
Do we need a motion to change the name of the Committee on Committees?
Into what should we call
It is a working group.
It is a working group on committees.
Our
That'd be
city
good.
attorney was very upset.
Whenever we refer to ourselves in committees. All right. Seeing no more lights. All right. Motion to adjourn.
Yes.
So moved.
Thank you so much. I have a second. Thank you all. Everybody have a great night.